Chapter 104. The next day, the matriarch continued to visit the Crown Prince mansion with Yu Miaoqi and the Lin clan. Yu Xiang and Yu Siyu traveled together. The Crown Princess's throat was also burned, so she sent the Lin clan members to the side hall to be lectured. She communicated with the matriarch, Yu Xiang, and the others using slips of paper. There was no ill feeling between their words. In the following half a month, the group visited the poisoned female guests one after another. Because the Empress and the Crown Princess had magnanimously forgiven them, they didn't dare to be overbearing. They only gave a few words of advice. However, Yu Miaoqi and the Lin clan's reputation was still ruined. In the past, there were still a few familiar families in the prefecture Yu that they could interact with. Now, the prefecture Yu was completely deserted. The influential officials, intentionally or unintentionally, distanced themselves from the family Yu in an attempt to push the family Yu out of the circle of the top aristocratic families in Shangjing, completely isolating them. This action was exactly what Yu Pinyin wanted. Without human relations, he would be able to act without any distractions when the emperor eliminated the aristocratic families in the future. Emperor Qingkong was even more happy to see this happen. Yu Pinyin was now a loyal official, a good official, a lonely official, and an invincible general. Not only did he want to make the best use of this blade for himself, he also wanted to leave it for the Crown Prince. It didn't matter if his reputation was bad, as long as his ability wasn't bad. Therefore, although this matter had some impact on the prefecture Yu, it didn't damage Yu Pinyin's position in Emperor Qingkang's heart. Today, after visiting the last family, the matriarch summoned everyone to the main courtyard for a discussion. The weather was getting colder and colder. A fire cage was burning in the middle of the hall. On top of it was a table covered with a quilt. The matriarch's body was weak after being poisoned. At this time, she was huddling under the quilt to keep warm. When she saw her grandchildren, she quickly called for them to sit around the fire cage. After Yu Pinyin put his sister down, he sat next to her. Yu Siyu sat on the other side of the old lady. The four of them just happened to fill up all the seats. Seeing Mama Ma come in with a box, Yu Xiang asked, "Do you want to play mahjong? I just happened to bring some golden sunflower seeds over." Upon hearing this, Yu Siyu also went to dig into her purse with an excited expression. Yu Pinyin smiled as he untied the pouch from his waist and handed it to his younger sister. Inside the pouch were not golden sunflower seeds, but 5 spice-fried sunflower seeds. Yu Xiang was even happier than when she got the golden melon seeds. She poured them all out, spread out a handkerchief, and raised her chin at her brother. "Grandmother, I suddenly feel unwell. Can I go and rest first and check the accounts tomorrow?" Yu Miaoqi tried to stall for time and then persuade the Lin clan to take the blame for her. Because the Lin clan was still in the dark about this matter, they would naturally be shocked when they first heard about it. Then, other people would see the clues. "You can go back. The Lin clan can stay." The old lady took out the account books from the box and looked at Yu Siyu. "I heard that you're in charge of the villages in the countryside. Today, let old ancestor see if you've made any progress." Yu Siyu gladly agreed. Yu Xiang also picked up a stack of account books. How could Yu Miaoqi dare to go back alone? She could only kindly send the 4 mamas and 4 maidservants away. Then, she walked over with the Lin clan and sat down. "Mother, please give daughter-in-law another chance." "Mother, daughter-in-law." The Lin clan tried to beg the old lady for mercy. In her heart, she didn't think there was a problem with the account books. She only thought that it was a mess caused by the servants deceiving their superiors and that it had nothing to do with her daughter. But at the time, those servants had pushed the blame onto her daughter in front of all the guests. She couldn't refute them and could only take the blame. The old lady sternly interrupted her, "Shut up. You can talk to me after checking the accounts." As she spoke, she ordered someone to bring over 3 abacuses. The matter of checking accounts had nothing to do with men, so Yu Pinyin didn't participate. He only smiled and looked at his sister's serious profile. Yu Xiang sensed his burning gaze and looked at old ancestor. She discovered that she was engrossed in checking the accounts and didn't notice her. Her moist red lips slightly pouted. This was her habitual action when she asked her brother for a kiss. At the end, she even sent him a teasing look. Yu Pinyin's hand that was holding the teacup suddenly tightened. If there weren't so many people in the hall, he really wanted to pull the little minx into his arms and dote on her. After Yu Xiang finished teasing her brother, she opened the account books and seriously looked at them. She skimmed through them very quickly. While the others had only finished half of the books, she had already read 4 or 5 books. She used a red pen to circle suspicious areas. After half an hour, she finished reading all the books. She took out the abacus and her fingers quickly moved over it. For a moment, there was only a series of crisp crackling sounds in the hall. The old lady and Yusiyu had already stopped working. They waited for her to finish one book before handing over another book. Their speed was as fast as lightning. The fine sweat on Yu Miaoqi's forehead had already condensed into droplets and flowed down his hairline to his neck. This was the first time she had seen Yu Xiang manage the accounts. Her sharp eyes and fast speed shocked her. It was because Yu Xiang was too capable that her competitive spirit was aroused and she desperately wanted to surpass her. However, after struggling for half a year, she disappointedly discovered that the gap between her and Yu Xiang was not as large as she had imagined. She still had a long way to go. She quietly moved her arm and pulled the Lin clan's hand over. She wrote stroke by stroke on the Lin clan's palm, "Mother, help me." The Lin clan looked at her in confusion. She wrote again, her eyes filled with deep despair and pleading. The Lin clan suddenly realized something. Her eyes widened and her pupils contracted. She mouthed silently, "Did you really use the central funds?" Yu Miaoqi had to nod and admit it. She originally only wanted to use a little and return the money when the shop made money. Who knew that the shop would lose more and more money? No matter how much money she spent, there was no sound. She became anxious, but there was nothing she could do. She could only piece together the money and make up for it. If it wasn't for the fact that she had no other choice, she definitely wouldn't have dared to use the old lady's money. The Lin clan was so scared that they began to tremble. She originally wanted to let the old lady check first. After checking and seeing that there were no problems with the account books, she might be able to keep them after a few pleas. However, if her daughter really embezzled the money, she was afraid that she could only be kicked out of the house. This was her and her Junjia's home. She still had many beautiful memories. She couldn't bear to leave, and she couldn't bear to lose the status of being the Junjia's wife. If she couldn't be buried with her Junjia after death, where would she find him in the Yellow Springs? With this thought, the Lin clan felt endless resentment towards Yu Miaoqi. However, when she saw her fearful eyes, the Lin clan's heart softened. She felt as if her internal organs had been scraped by a steel knife. When the two of them exchanged glances, Yu Xiang closed the last account book and sighed. Yu Pinyin rubbed her sore fingertips and fed her a cup of tea. "Yu Miaoqi, do you know that you're like a groundhog?" No one expected this to be her first sentence. The old lady and Yusiyu froze. Yu Pinyin also revealed a confused expression. Yu Miaoqi wasn't sure what she meant. She forced a smile and said, "Mimi, are you joking?" "I'm not joking." Yu Xiang patted the account book, "Look at you. You're digging a hole here, a hole there, a handful of soil here, a handful of soil there. You've dug countless holes in a perfectly good piece of land. Don't you think you're like a groundhog?" Yu Miaoqi understood this time. Her face immediately turned pale. Yu Xiang's light tone suddenly turned severe, "If you don't have the ability, then don't take on such a big business. If the dowry shop lost money, you could have closed it down. Why use the public money to make up for it?" Do you think the public money is your private property? I've seen all kinds of people, but this is the first time I've seen someone as incompetent, wasteful, and greedy as you. In just half a year, you've embezzled 68,448 taels of silver. Tell me what you should do. Chapter 105. The Lin clan once again placed all the blame on themselves. She could be called a loving mother to Yu Miaoqi. No matter how big of a mistake she made, she could forgive her and even bear all the responsibility. However, she didn't care about Yu Pinyin at all, as if she had never given birth to this child. Yu Xiang could imagine how much her older brother had crouched in a dark corner of the prison, suffering from the fear of murder and the torture of a high fever. How much he had longed for the warmth and motherly love of the Lin clan. However, what did she do? It was fine if she didn't come to visit, but she actually said that her older brother wasn't worthy of being her child. This sentence was equivalent to personally stabbing a knife into her older brother's heart. The more she defended Yu Miaoqi, the more Yu Xiang disliked her. She sneered, "Mother, don't cover up for her anymore. In the past 6 months, I've only seen Yu Miaoqi jumping up and down, eager to show off her talents to others, but forgetting to measure her own worth." Without waiting for her to finish, Yu Miaoqi suddenly flared up, "Yu Xiang, shut up. Everyone has the right to reprimand me, but you don't. What's your relationship with the family Yu? You've freeloaded for 15 years, and the family Yu has already done everything they can for you. You're so anxious, could it be that you want to meddle with the prefecture Yu family business? Do you think you're worthy?" Yu Xiang choked. There was a lump in her chest, and she couldn't vent her anger. She already knew that Yu Miaoqi would use these words to block her and make her very unhappy. She poured a cup of tea and pulled her older brother's large hand over under the cover of the quilt. She wrote on his palm stroke by stroke, "How am I not worthy? I'm the future Marchioness. Your money is my money. She stole our money, but I'm not allowed to say anything. What kind of logic is this?" Yu Pinyin carefully identified the strokes. When he realized what she had said, he almost drowned in the joy surging in his heart. He suddenly pulled his sister into his arms and lowered his head to kiss her slightly red cheeks. With a crisp pop, not only was Yu Xiang petrified, but old Madam and Yu Siyu were also stunned. Even the Lin clan and Yu Miaoqi, who were panicking, were momentarily speechless. After kissing her, Yu Pinyin didn't back down. He continued to kiss his sister's hair and said in a hoarse voice, "I'm sorry. I suddenly remembered how Xiang'er blocked a knife for me back then. Without Xiang'er, I wouldn't be who I am now. Who dares to say that she doesn't deserve it?" Sensing that the cat in his arms was about to explode, he rubbed the back of her neck to comfort her. Old Madame Fu was immediately brought back to her memories. She nodded and said, "Yandere is right. Xiang'er is a part of my family Yu. If anyone dares to gossip about her in the future, they can get the hell out." "Yu Miaoqi, you have the nerve to reprimand Xiang'er. Look at what you've done. You've used the public's money to supplement your own private assets. In the entire capital, you won't be able to find a more morally corrupt young lady than you." Old Madame Fu angrily slammed the table, scaring Yu Miaoqi into silence. Yu Xiang, on the other hand, let out a sigh of relief. She thought that it was a close call. Then, she buried her face in her brother's arms and bit his chest to vent her anger, causing his entire body to tremble. Yu Pinyin's lower abdomen was on fire, but he couldn't do anything about it. He could only smile bitterly and stroke the cat's fur. Lin clan members knew that they had no way out. They knelt at old Madame Fu's feet and cried, "Mother, don't scold Cheer. I did all of this. She's just a child. She doesn't have the guts." Old Madame Fu was so angry that she laughed, "Lin clan, don't treat me like a fool. I believe that you don't have the guts, but I don't believe that Yu Miaoqi doesn't have the guts. If she didn't have the guts, would she have stubbornly broken into the relay station to deliver medicine to the crown prince? If she didn't have the guts, would she have smashed Family Shin's gold Buddha statue and glued it back, causing Family Shin's family to be ruined? If she didn't have the guts, would she have stolen Madame Shin's life-saving money and snuck out to look for her family? If she didn't have the guts, would she have bribed the Fong family's mother and son to ruin Siyu's reputation? If she didn't have the guts, would she have spread rumors to ruin Lord Shin's career? Her guts are bigger than the heavens. Old Madame Fu was so angry that she dug up many old matters that no one knew about. Not only did she scold Yu Miaoqi until she couldn't raise her head, but she also made Yu Xiang's eyes widen. Yu Pinyin had only told her that her surname was Shen, that her parents had passed away, and that she only had one older brother. However, connecting it to the coronet that Shin Yuanqi had given her and the old madame's accusations, she instantly connected all the clues into a story. A tragic story of a ruined family, and the culprit behind all of this was Yu Miaoqi. Although she didn't have any feelings for Family Shin's blood still flowed in her body. Taking 10,000 steps back, based on the things that Yu Miaoqi had done, even if it was an unrelated outsider, they would still feel righteous indignation. She withdrew from her older brother's embrace, raised the teacup in her hand, and threw it at Yu Miaoqi like an enraged lion. Good one, Yu Miaoqi. You even said that I stole your respected position and wealth. Why didn't you tell me that you caused my parents' deaths? Why didn't you tell me that you almost caused my older brother's reputation to be ruined? You venomous woman, how can you still have the face to live? In any case, they raised you for more than 10 years. Yu Miaoqi had already expected that she would be furious, so she quickly hid behind the Lin clan while she was making trouble. She wanted to defend herself, but when she opened her mouth, she found that she had nothing to say. Yu Pinyin hugged his younger sister tightly, his large palm stroking her back over and over again, trying to calm her down. The old madam knew that she had said the wrong thing, so she quickly leaned over and whispered, "Xianger, don't be angry. It's all over. You still have old ancestor, your older brother, your older sister, and your family that loves you. Don't be angry, it's all over." The Lin clan hugged Yu Miaoqi back and cried, "Please don't blame Cheer, at least leave her a way out." "I'll leave, okay. I'll go back and pack my things now." She had already accepted her fate. She only hoped that her daughter could safely stay in the Marquis household and find a good home. Yu Xiang didn't have any feelings for the Shin couple, so her anger over their wrongful deaths wasn't as strong as her anger over Shin Yuanqi being hurt by the rumors. After she calmed down, she only felt sad for them. "I'm fine." She patted her older brother and smiled at the old madam. Then she looked at Yu Miaoqi and said word by word, "In the future, don't say that I owe you anything in front of me. I only owe you riches and honor, but you owe me a blood feud of the destruction of my family. If we really want to talk about it, I should kill you with my own hands today to avenge my parents." She pulled out a dagger from a hidden compartment in the wheelchair armrest and stabbed it into the table. The dull thud scared the Lin clan and Yu Miaoqi so much that they both trembled. "But since you're also surnamed Yu, I won't touch you. In the future, stay away from me. If you're there, I won't be there. If I'm there, you won't be there. Do you understand?" Her tone was cold. Despite such a blatant threat, the old madam and Yu Pinyin didn't stop her. One closed her eyes and pretended to sleep, while the other focused on drinking tea. His big hand hidden under the table was still holding his younger sister's small white hand and rubbing it, unable to stop himself. "I understand." The Lin clan held his daughter's head and promised. He stood up and said, "As long as you don't drive Chi-er out, I'll leave immediately." She had no choice but to leave. Although the poisonous date incident was already over, who knew what those female guests were thinking? Divorcing her at this juncture would be the best explanation, and no one would be able to say anything. Yu Siyu, who had been silent all this time, spoke up at the right time, "Mother, you're leaving just like that? Aren't you forgetting something?" As he spoke, he slapped the thick stack of account books with a loud thud. "That's right, there was still the 60,000 taels of silver that her daughter had lost. Only then did the Lin clan remember this. She couldn't stand straight and held her head as if she was about to faint. All of her dowry added together was only worth 20,000 taels of silver. Where would she go to find 40,000 taels of silver? Go back and ask her Shu elder brother for help. If he knew that she was no longer a marchioness, he would be the first to hit her when she was down. A cold wind blew against the beaded curtains. It was clearly very pleasant to the ears, but it made the Lin clan feel extremely desolate. She held back her tears and knelt at the old madam's feet again. After kowtowing, she wanted to say something, but found that she didn't know what to say. The evidence was conclusive and the consequences were severe. She didn't even have the leeway to plead for mercy. The old madam still closed her eyes and pretended to sleep. Yu Pinyin suddenly said, "Forget it. You can leave." This was the last time he would show mercy to the Lin clan. The Lin clan cried tears of joy and said matter-of-factly, "Since Yen won't pursue the matter, then I'll leave all of the dowry to Qi. After I leave, I hope that you two siblings can reconcile and help each other. Your father is still watching over you from the underworld. He definitely doesn't want you to end up like this." Yu Pinyin, Yu Xiang, and Yu Siyu all had strange expressions on their faces. The old madam suddenly opened her eyes and slammed the prayer beads in her hand on the table. She screamed at the top of her lungs, "Get out of here. Hurry and get out. I never want to see you again." The Lin clan was scared out of their wits and instantly collapsed to the ground. Yu Pinyin put down his teacup and said in a low voice, "Go pack your things. After you're done, I'll personally send you home." Yu Miaoqi wanted to support the Lin clan, but Mama Ma called two servant girls to half-drag the Lin clan away. She could only stand there awkwardly. The old madam didn't even look at her. She sighed and said, "Xiang, you know about the sins that Yu Miaoqi committed. That's right, Shen Zhuang Yuan is your blood-related older brother. What do you think now? Do you have any plans?" The old madam's subtext was asking Yu Xiang if she wanted to acknowledge her roots and ancestors. Of course, she wanted to acknowledge her roots and ancestors, but Yu Xiang wasn't familiar with Shen Yuanqi. If she suddenly ran over to live with him, she would more or less be uncomfortable. Moreover, she had just confessed her feelings to her older brother. It was the sweetest and most affectionate time. She really couldn't bear to leave. Yu Pinyin didn't say anything, but his eyes darkened slightly. Yu Xiang quickly glanced at him and answered slowly, "Since he's my blood-related older brother, I should naturally." Before she could finish her sentence, the old madam slapped her on the head and forced her to swallow her words. "You damn child." Chapter 106. The Lin clan originally wanted to take away her late husband's memorial tablet, but Mama Ma stopped them. She said that she was no longer Master Ho's wife and wasn't worthy of worshipping Master Ho. These words caused the Lin clan to burst into tears. After crying, they had no choice but to pack up and leave. Yu Miaoqi sat in the same carriage as her, and Yu Pinyin rode in front to lead the way. The group didn't go to the Lin mansion, but instead went to Lin Jimin's, the Lin clan's younger brother, small courtyard on South Gate Street. Yu Miaoqi held the Lin clan's cold fingertips and quietly asked, "Mother, youngest uncle is unreliable. Why don't you go find eldest uncle? Although you're no longer the Marchioness, I'm still part of the family you. For my sake, they won't dare to do anything to you." In the end, she was thinking for herself. Only by sending the Lin clan back to the Lin mansion would she have a chance to get in touch with eldest uncle Lin and borrow the Lin family's money to salvage the situation. The Lin clan firmly shook her head. "You can't go find your eldest uncle. If he knows that I've been divorced by the Marquis household, not only will he not help me, he'll do everything he can to suppress me. You can't go find your eldest uncle," she reiterated. Yu Miaoqi had a bad feeling. "Mother, What kind of deep hatred could cause him to hold a grudge until now? You're still a family. You're bound together for good or ill. The Lin clan hesitated for a long time before finally speaking frankly. That year, in order to fight for the family business, your youngest uncle and I worked together to kill your eldest uncle's eldest son, so, she really couldn't say the rest of her words. Yu Miaoqi was speechless. She never would have thought that such a lowly and cowardly Lin clan would have such a vicious and merciless side. You could work with others to kill your eldest brother's eldest son, so why couldn't you have killed Yuxiang earlier? She simply wanted to shout it out regardless of everything. There was a deathly silence in the carriage. By the time the two regained their senses, they had already arrived in front of Lin Jimin's door. When Madame Sun saw Yu Pinyin leaping down from the tall horse, she hurriedly lifted her skirt and came out to greet him. I was wondering why the magpies were so noisy on the branches today. It turns out that eldest nephew is here. Please come in. Yu Pinyin waved his hand. No, I'm just sending her home. I'll have to trouble you to take care of her in the future. Madame Sun looked back and saw Yu Miaoqi and the Lin clan standing beside the carriage. Their faces were very haggard, and the Lin clan was carrying a small package in their hands. On the day of her wedding anniversary, Madame Sun was also present. The Lin clan and Yu Miaoqi had done such a disgraceful thing that she couldn't raise her head for half a month. Seeing this scene, how could she not understand? The Marquis household had divorced the Lin clan in order to appease public anger. From the standpoint of an outsider, Madame Sun would say, they deserved it. From the standpoint of a family member, she only wanted to kneel to Yu Pinyin and beg him not to be so heartless. Unexpectedly, before she could speak, Yu Pinyin had already leapt onto the horse's back and urged, if you have something to say it quickly. I'm busy. With the Lin clan gone, Yu Miaoqi could be said to be isolated and without help. She grabbed the corner of Yu Pinyin's robe and begged, eldest brother, can't you wait until the storm calms down before bringing mother back? I know you resent mother for being cold to you, but think about it carefully. After all these years, she has never mistreated you. Wasn't it hard for her to give birth to you after carrying you for 10 months? Yu Pinyin looked down at her with a cold smile. That's right, the Lin clan had never mistreated him, but he would rather the Lin clan hit and scold him than be ignored by them for more than 10 years. The most hurtful thing in this world was not the pain of the flesh, but the pain of the heart. However, this mother and daughter pair were heartless, so what was the point of saying so much to them? Yu Pinyin laughed and tightened his grip on the reins to gallop away, leaving behind Yu Miaoqi to stare at his back with hatred. On the second floor of a hotel across the street, a handsome young man dressed in luxurious clothes pointed at Yu Miaoqi, who was radiating a murderous aura, and asked, who is that woman? She seems to want to skin Commander Yu alive. The aide sitting across from him replied, Fourth Master, that is Commander Yu's younger sister, Yu Miaoqi. The youth naturally knew the details of the poison date incident. He sighed with a smile, so it was her. What bad luck. What a pity. It was a pity that the Crown Princess and the Ninth Princess hadn't been poisoned to death together. That way, he could have easily toppled the Crown Prince's most reliable backer. It really was a pity, the aide nodded in understanding, indeed, you were just a bit off by luck. However, Fourth Master, as the saying goes, an ant's nest collapses 1,000 li. No matter how indestructible a wall looks on the outside, as long as you find a node inside and destroy it, you can cause the entire wall to collapse. This node is right in front of you. What do you think, Fourth Master? The youth muttered to himself for a moment, then raised his cup and drank to his heart's content. Let's give it a try. Yu Miaoqi sent the Lin clan into the room. Before she could even sit down, Sunshire anxiously asked, why did you only bring back so little things? Although you were divorced, your dowry should be handled by you. The family Yu has no right to take it. The Lin clan wasn't stupid. She cried, sister-in-law, you don't know. In order to make up for the losses of the dowry stores, I misappropriated more than 60,000 taels of public silver. The matriarch found out. My dowry was all detained by the matriarch in the marquis household as compensation. I don't have anything on me now. I only brought a few pieces of clothing and a few hairpins. Sunshine furrowed her brows and angrily jabbed her forehead with her fingertips, scolding, "You still have the face to cry. How can you do such a disgraceful thing as misappropriating public silver? You misappropriated so much money. Don't tell me you don't have a single cent left. Where did you spend it? How much money can a few stores cost?" Yu Miaoqi had a headache from her shrill voice. She fiercely smashed her teacup and scolded, "Have you said enough? A few stores don't cost much money. Ask yourself, how much money did you and uncle embezzle from the accounts? Just because I didn't say anything doesn't mean I don't know. I just didn't have anyone to use, so I tolerated you for the time being. Now that I've sent my mother here, I don't want you to return the money. I only hope that you can take good care of my mother. I'm still the legitimate daughter of the marquis household. With me supporting you, you won't have to worry about food." Yu Miaoqi's words didn't mean that she had any feelings for the Lin clan. She just didn't have anyone to rely on and wanted to leave a way out for herself. She had treated the family Shen too harshly. Only now did she understand the principle of leaving a way out for others to meet in the future. If she had stayed for one more day and begged Shen Yuanqi to send her back to the capital to reunite with her relatives, she definitely wouldn't have fallen to the point where she was deserted by everyone. The Lin clan was moved to tears, but Sunshine didn't buy it. She sneered, "Who do you think you are? Can you even compare to a single finger of Xiang'er's? Xiang'er has more face than you. I'll go and beg her to get my dowry back." The Lin clan hurriedly pulled her back and anxiously said, "Don't go. She won't help you. She's not my daughter." "What did you say?" Sunshine dug her ears, thinking that she had misheard. The Lin clan was afraid that she would go and cause trouble and forcefully take away the dowry they had left for their daughter, so they could only tell her what had happened that year. Sunshine was stunned for a long time. When she came to her senses, she wanted to tear the Lin clan apart. She scolded, "You idiot. You're so stupid. It doesn't matter if she's not your flesh and blood. As long as old Madam and Master Ho like her, it's fine. You raised her and made her favor you. Isn't that several hundred times more effective than this star of misfortune? If Xiang'er could say a few good words for you today, you wouldn't have been kicked out of the house. You idiot, you didn't care about what you should care about, and you treasured what you shouldn't care about. Your capable son actually had the heart to not care about you for 15 years. You really deserve to end up like this today." The Lin clan was living under someone else's roof, so they didn't dare to refute. Yu Miaoqi couldn't listen anymore, but she didn't have the strength to fight with Sunshine. She straightened her back and slowly walked out of the courtyard. She wandered on the street like a wandering soul. The hustle and bustle of the street set off the loneliness at this moment. Her eyes were slightly moist, and she had to raise her head to look at the sky to prevent her tears from splashing down. "Miss, be careful." A clear voice suddenly sounded, and then she was pulled into a broad and warm embrace. A carriage sped past her feet, bringing along a gust of wind. Yu Miaoqi raised her head with lingering fear and bumped into a pair of gentle eyes. The extraordinarily handsome young man raised the corner of his lips and smiled at her, like a beam of golden sunshine sprinkling down. "Prefecture Yu Xiang returned to Jing Fu's small courtyard after bidding farewell to the old madam. At this moment, she was weakly lying in front of the dressing table. The old madam was determined not to let her and Shen Yuanqi recognize each other. She really treated her as her own granddaughter and loved her dearly. If the matter between her and her brother was exposed in the future, the old madam would be very sad, and she could foresee her strong resistance. It was really worrying. Yu Xiang sighed faintly at herself in the mirror. "Miss, don't think about it." Hurry and plant the seeds that Dr. Piao sent. If they don't germinate next month, the Bing Jin Yulu ointment you promised to give to the crown princess will be gone. Tao Hong timely reminded. Yu Xiang immediately took off the pearl hairpins on her head, wrapped a headscarf around her head, and changed into coarse clothes. She ordered Lu Lu to push her to the stone table outside the courtyard. Dr. Piao made Yu Xiang a medicine farmer, so he naturally wouldn't instruct her, a cripple, to dig holes and plant the seeds. He only sent the seeds of precious herbs, and let her plant them in a flower pot. If they grew, then he would transplant them to his medicine garden. On the stone table, there were many palm-sized flower pots neatly arranged. Inside the pots, there was a soil base that Yu Xiang specially mixed. She only needed to poke a hole with her fingertip, stuff the seeds into the hole, fill it with soil, and water. After quickly planting a dozen seeds, Yu Xiang's tightly knitted brows had completely relaxed, and her mouth babbled a yellow plum tune. "Miss, you're not worried anymore?" Tao Hong asked with a smile. "What do I have to worry about? Even if the sky falls, there are tall people to hold it up. If he can't even withstand this little pressure, then he should just forget about plucking a delicate flower like me." Yu Xiang wrinkled her nose and snorted. "That's true." Tao Hong nodded in agreement. Lu didn't have such a good attitude, and said worriedly, "Today, old madam didn't let Miss acknowledge your ancestors no matter what. I'm afraid she treats Miss as her own granddaughter. If she knew that Miss and Master Ho, she definitely wouldn't be able to accept it. She might even hate Miss." After planting the seeds, Yu Xiang used a small ladle to scoop water, and casually replied, "It doesn't matter. I'll be filial to her in the future. After all, she's my ancestor. How could she hate me for the rest of her life? She's the most soft-hearted. When the time comes, I'll give birth to 8 or 10 great-grandchildren for her. Let's see if she still has the strength to be angry with me." Chapter 107. After Yu Xiang finished planting the herbs, she took a bath and laid on the bed to look at the jadeite hairpin that Shin Yuanqi had given her. Lu wiped her wet hair with a towel and praised, "This was given by Zhuang Yuan, right? It's not inferior to the one Master Ho gave you. It's clear that he cares a lot about Mississippi." Yu Xiang smiled. "I always thought he looked familiar, but I didn't expect him to be my older brother. No wonder he looks so handsome, but he looks like me." Lulu's mouth twitched. "He's a few years older than Miss, so it should be you who looks like him. But it's strange, you and Master Ho aren't related by blood, but you look 50 to 60% similar. It's really strange." Yu Xiang touched her cheek with a self-satisfied expression. "I've said it before, husband and wife look alike." While the two were talking, a low laugh came from outside the door. Yu Pinyin was reaching out to lift the bead curtain. Tao Hong rushed forward and cheerfully said, "Son-in-law, you're back. This servant will pour you some tea." She was about to leave when Yu Pinyin called out, "Wait, what did you just call this marquis?" Tao Hong blinked with an innocent expression. "Son-in-law, what else could I call you?" Lu covered her face and groaned. Yu Pinyin's low laugh turned into a hearty laugh. She didn't know how he did it, but he flipped his hand and took out a small gold ingot. He smiled and said, "Girl, you're quite perceptive. Here's your reward." Tao Hong's eyes suddenly widened. She took the gold ingot with both hands and said, "This servant thanks son-in-law for the reward. Son-in-law, please come in. Son-in-law, please take a seat. Son-in-law, please wait a moment. This servant will go to the side room to make tea." Yu Xiang held her forehead and said weakly, "Okay, you should go. You won't get a reward even if you call me son-in-law, unless you want me to knock you on the head." Tao Hong hurriedly covered his forehead and ran away. Lu retreated along the wall and closed the door before leaving. Yu Pinyin walked to his sister's bedside and sat down. He smiled and said, "I always thought that Lu was smarter than Tao Hong. Today, I realized that I was wrong. Yu Xiang put the crown into the box and snorted, my two girls are very smart. Otherwise, why would I like them? Yu Pinyin picked up the towel on the bedside table and continued to wipe her hair. He stared at the brocade box and asked, I've never seen this hairpin before. Who gave it to you? Shen Yuanqi gave it to me. Yu Siyu gave it to me on the day of my hairpin ceremony. Yu Xiang supported her chin with one hand and said expectantly, Brother, can I meet him in private? He's really good. He has a good temper, good grades, good looks, and good character. The smile on Yu Pinyin's face disappeared. He asked in a low voice, he has good grades and good looks. How can you tell his temper and character? You see, Yu Miaoqi caused our family to be ruined. After he became the top scholar, he never thought of taking revenge on her. It can be seen that he has a very noble character. Since you're so anxious to meet him, why don't I go report to the old ancestor now and have her send you back? Then I'll go and propose marriage. Yu Pinyin pressed his whole body on his sister's body and nibbled on her slender neck as he spoke. Yu Xiang immediately cowered. She hugged her brother's thin waist and said in a low voice, Don't go, don't go. It's almost the end of the year. Let's let the old ancestor have a good new year first. We'll talk about the matter of meeting him next year. Yu Pinyin didn't answer. He kissed her from her neck to her collarbone, leaving a few bright red marks on it. Yu Xiang moaned. Her cheeks flushed uncontrollably and her eyes were wet. She looked like a kitten craving for its owner's love. Yu Pinyin's eyes darkened. He lifted her blouse with his big hands and forcefully kneaded her smooth, round shoulders. His breath was as hot as fire. Right at this moment, Tao Hong walked in carelessly with a pot of tea in her hands. Seeing the two people entangled together, she screamed in fear and then ran away. Fortunately, she was very professional and didn't smash the teapot as well. Yu Pinyin rolled over and sat up. He carefully adjusted his sister's collar and used his thumb to scrape her seductive cleavage. He panted and said, I just said that she was a good girl, but in the blink of an eye, she's become a fool. When Yu Xiang heard this, she laughed and collapsed on the bed. Lu chased after Tao Hong. She took the tea tray and cautiously knocked on the door. She only entered when she heard permission. After pouring tea for the two masters, she took out a small delicate medicine bottle and reminded, Miss, it's time to massage and apply medicine. Yu Xiang's legs had to be massaged once a day to maintain muscle activity. Because Tao Hong was very strong, she usually did this work. However, she was scared away today, so Lu had to take over. Unexpectedly, Master Ho took the medicine bottle and said, Let me do it. You can leave first. Lu stood stiffly and refused to leave. Marquis, you have to roll up the young Miss trousers when you massage her. That's why I shouldn't look at indecent things. Yu Pinyin smiled and looked at her. I was the one who massaged Xiang'er's legs before she was 14 years old. Do you think I don't know? Lu looked at Master Ho's cold face and burning eyes, then looked at her heartless masters. She had no choice but to bow and leave. The room was heated, and there were two braziers by the bed. The temperature was like that of a warm spring day. It was very pleasant. Yu Xiang was only wearing a short skirt and a light smock. She had already taken off the white stockings on her feet. Her 10 small, round, pink toes were slightly curled up. She looked extremely cute. Yu Xiang silently lit a candle for Dr. Piao and comforted her, Don't. Dr. Piao is called, Keep Him Alive. Even His Majesty is counting on him to keep him alive. You must not do that. We'll search for another year. If we can't find him, then forget it. In any case, I'll stay at home all day and you'll carry me wherever I go. It doesn't really matter if I can walk or not. Yu Pinyin lowered his head and focused on massaging her feet. He didn't reply and his expression couldn't be seen clearly. Yu Xiang was afraid that he would really cause trouble for Dr. Piao, so she had no choice but to change the topic. Speaking of which, until I was 14 years old, it was Gige who massaged my legs. Gige's skills are countless times better than Tao Hong's. Why did he suddenly stop massaging me? Yu Pinyin finally raised his head. His deep eyes were filled with lingering love, and his voice was especially deep and hoarse, because after the last massage, Gige went back to have wet dreams. He could see but couldn't eat, so he simply stopped looking. If these words, which were full of teasing and erotic meaning, were heard by an ordinary girl, they would be embarrassed to death. However, Yu Xiang was thick-skinned. At first, she was a little shy, but after she got used to it, she was even more open than Yu Pinyin. In her previous life, she had never been in contact with the opposite sex other than her twin brother, so naturally, she had never been in a relationship. Now that she experienced this sweet feeling, she couldn't stop. She treated it as a secret realm and kept exploring it. When she heard these words, her bright eyes were filled with self-satisfaction. She used her index finger to point at her slightly pouted red lips and said seductively, "You like me that much? Then why don't you come and kiss me?" Yu Pinyin chuckled softly. He was aroused by her straightforwardness and her unreserved nature. If the first half of his life was filled with misery and killing, then the bright and beautiful little woman in front of him was the only light and sweetness in his dark and gloomy life. He slowly approached her and opened his mouth to suck on her pink and glossy red lips. However, the red lips retreated the moment before they touched. "What's wrong?" His Adam's apple moved. He was very thirsty. "Let's change the way we kiss." Yu Xiang pushed her brother's handsome face away and looked left and right. She picked up a long strip of malt candy placed on the plate and bit it between her teeth. She said vaguely, "Come and kiss me." This was the first time in her 2 lifetimes that she had been in a relationship. She was like a child who had gotten a new toy and was constantly looking for more fun ways to play. Not only did she have all kinds of strange requests when they were together, she could even play hundreds of different ways when they kissed. Yu Pinyin loved her shameless personality, but he really didn't know how to kiss her through the malt candy. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he asked, "You have something in your mouth. How do you want your brother to kiss you?" "I'll bite this end and you bite the other end. We'll bite and bite until we kiss." "Why are you so stupid?" Yu Xiang said as she poked his mouth with the malt candy in her mouth. Yu Pinyin felt as if he had just been enlightened, or as if he had just eaten a few 100 kilograms of jokes. While laughing, he bit down on her lips. In the end, he bit down on her delicate lips. The sweetness that was different from usual exploded on the tip of their tongues. In an instant, countless fireworks bloomed in his mind. Yu Pinyin's eyes were dark red. He pinched his sister's slender waist hard. He couldn't wait to swallow her with this incomparably sweet taste. After the kiss, Yu Xiang hugged his neck and kept asking, "Is it sweet? Is it sweet?" Chapter 108. After sending off the Lin clan, Yu Xiang and Yu Siyu became the joint head of the household. The Marquis household finally returned to its former tranquility. After all, the 4 etiquette instructors came from the palace. They were afraid that the Empress would forget them if they stayed too long. Seeing that Yu Miaoqi was much more well-behaved, they hurriedly bid farewell. Before they left, they held 500 volumes of women's precepts, which Yu Miaoqi copied every day. Since then, Yu Miaoqi often left the Fu, saying that she was going to visit the Lin clan. She seemed to have recovered from a series of blows. Not only was her complexion rosy, even her eyes were full of vigor. Especially after visiting the Lin clan, she could greet people with a smile for several days in a row. Yu Xiang sent people to follow her. Seeing that she didn't come out after entering the Lin residence, he slowly let down his guard. It was a rare sunny day. The golden sunlight dispelled the biting cold wind, and the air was filled with the fragrance of blooming plum blossoms. Yu Pinyin was on break. At this moment, he was standing behind his desk and painting. He was painting a picture of plum blossoms blooming proudly in the snow. Yu Xiang was lying on the soft couch across from him. She was holding a supernatural novel and reading it with great interest. Yu Pinyin lost interest after touching a few plum blossoms. He threw the paper to the side and took out another one. He looked at his sister carefully. Yu Xiang sensed his focused gaze. She put down the book and asked, "Are you painting me?" "And, don't move." Yu Pinyin carefully mixed the ink. Yu Xiang blinked. She seemed to have thought of something. She quickly took off the pearl hairpin in her hair and undid her hair, letting her ankle-length hair fall. Then she arranged her legs into a graceful posture of lying on her side and crossing her legs. She took off her white stockings, revealing her small and exquisite jade feet. One hand hung naturally at her waist, and the other hand rested on her cheek. She smiled brightly. "Paint me like this." After saying this, she felt that it was still a bit imperfect. After thinking for a bit, she took off her blouse to her elbows, revealing her white and smooth shoulders. Yu Pinyin's hand that was holding the pen tightened unconsciously. With a crisp crack, the pen broke into two pieces. Yu Pinyin's hand suddenly tightened around the pen. Yu Pinyin held his forehead helplessly. He threw the pen out of the window and walked over quickly. His deep voice revealed a strong desire. "Xianger, how do you want me to draw you like this?" "Right now, I just want to kiss you." As he spoke, his lips moved closer and closer. "Then let's draw after we kiss. Draw my red and swollen lips." Yu Xiang giggled and stuck out her tongue to lick her brother's thin and beautiful lips. Yu Pinyin didn't know that his sister would be so passionate after confessing her feelings. Even a saint wouldn't be able to resist her. Yu Pinyin moaned softly and then fiercely bit the little fairy's lips into her mouth. Yu Xiang snorted and hugged his neck. The two of them instantly rolled onto the soft bed, entangling each other. There was already a fire in the room, and now the temperature rose by a lot. It was almost possible to see a few small sparks. Tao Hong and Lu Lu stood guard outside the door. When they heard the occasional clicking of tongues from inside, their expressions had already changed from shy to numb. The imperial bodyguard guarding the study was even more numb than them. He stood straight not far away and didn't even move his eyebrows. At this moment, an imperial bodyguard hurriedly ran in from outside the courtyard. He knelt in front of the door and saluted, "Master Ho, Master Ku Hui has been found. He has already been escorted back by our people and will arrive in the capital tomorrow." The study was silent for a moment. After a short while, Yu Pinyin pushed open the door and ordered in a deep voice, "Prepare the horse. This marquis will personally go pick him up." Rather than saying that Master Ku Hui was being escorted back, it was better to say that he was being escorted back. In order to treat his younger sister, Yu Pinyin had racked his brains and sent many imperial bodyguards to India, Siam, and Southeast Asia to find him. In 5 years, he had spent a lot of money on the single journey. Fortunately, his hard work paid off. He finally found Ku Hui in India. Without another word, he carried him onto a ship and forcefully brought him back to the capital. Ku Hui was only 25 or 26 this year. Although he was personally raised by Kuhai, he usually studied medicine more than Buddhism. Because Kuhai said that his cultivation was not enough, he traveled far to seek scriptures. When he arrived in India and other places, he was attracted by foreign medicine and forgot to cultivate. Naturally, his state of mind was not as harmonious as Kuhai's. Ku Hui was not worried. Along the way, he asked around and found out that the person who kidnapped him was Marquis Yongla, who was known as the living king of hell. He killed people like scything flax and killed indiscriminately. His worry turned into resistance. When he arrived at Jinghua Temple, he heard Yu Pinyan's pleas and refused without thinking. Yu Pinyan asked nicely, "Great master, what do you want for you to be willing to treat my younger sister?" "As long as I, Yu Pinyan, am able to do it, I will do it." Ku Hui recited a passage of Buddhist scriptures. After opening his eyes, he slowly opened his mouth and said, "Today, wear an unlined garment and kneel 3 times and kowtow 9 times from the plank path at the foot of the mountain until you reach the temple gate. This poor monk will then consider your request." Zhenghua Temple was located at the top of the mountain. There was a driveway built around the mountain and a plank path used by woodcutters. It took an hour to walk by the driveway and 2 hours to walk by the plank path. Moreover, one had to walk up a steep staircase and kneel 3 times and kowtow 9 times. One could imagine how difficult it was. Even if Yu Pinyan was made of iron, he would not be able to withstand the torment. The imperial bodyguards standing on both sides could not help but draw their swords. Ku Hui closed his eyes and recited Buddhist scriptures in a low voice. Yu Pinyan waved his hand and ordered the imperial bodyguards to put away their swords. He cupped his hands and said, "Great master, then it's a deal." Then he hurried down the mountain. When he returned to the Marquis household, he did not tell anyone. He watched his younger sister fall asleep and quietly left when she lay on her side until midnight. Wearing only a snow-white unlined garment, he slowly walked up the mountain from the foot of the mountain with 3 kneels and 9 kowtows. Unknowingly, the dark sky faintly glowed with white light. His hair was covered with morning dew that condensed into ice beads. The fabric around his knees was torn because of the friction, revealing his bruised kneecaps. The imperial bodyguards following behind him were already in tears. They kept saying, "Master Ho, let your subordinates come down." However, he turned a deaf ear to them. When the sun rose, they finally arrived in front of Zhenghua Temple. However, Ku Hui refused to see them. He only sent a young novice monk and said, "Benefactor, your killing is too heavy and your sins cannot be washed away. Please continue tomorrow." "What did you say, bald donkey?" The imperial bodyguards were furious and drew their swords. However, Yu Pinyan only waved his hand and calmly got up. No matter how many times Ku Hui wanted him to kneel, even if he had to grind down all the steps on the plank walkway, he must cure his younger sister. "Master Ho, forget it." One of the imperial bodyguards gritted his teeth and growled. If he was tormented like this every day, would Master Ho still need his legs? Yu Pinyan suddenly turned his head, his eyes bloodshot. This Marquis doesn't want to hear this a second time. This matter concerns Xiang Er's life. How could he just let it go like this? The imperial bodyguards were swept by his murderous gaze and immediately kept quiet out of fear. However, a clear voice came from behind him. "That's right. Forget it. Xiang Er, why are you here?" Yu Pinyan wanted to go forward to greet her, but his stiff legs wouldn't listen to him. Yu Xiang arrived in front of him after being pushed by Tao Hong's Lulu. She raised her head and looked at him. Suddenly, she reached out and grabbed his lapel, pulling him to kneel on the ground. There was a dull thud that made everyone's teeth hurt. The imperial bodyguard's eyes were filled with resentment, but they didn't dare to say anything. It didn't matter if they offended Master Ho, but if they offended Miss Xiang, no one would be able to bear the consequences. Who didn't know that Miss Xiang, was Master Ho's lifeblood? Yu Xiang stroked the side of his face that was covered in stubbles. Her smile was bright and strange. "Does it hurt?" Without waiting for her brother to answer, she continued, "My heart hurts more than your knees. If I have to use your legs to cure my legs, then I might as well be paralyzed for the rest of my life. If you come back tomorrow, I'll personally remove my legs. Do you believe me?" She took out a dagger from a hidden compartment in the armrest of the wheelchair and forcefully cut her kneecap. The warm blood immediately dyed a large patch of her thick skirt red. Tao Hong's Lulu was so frightened that he cried out. The imperial bodyguards were also stunned and astonished. They all thought in unison, no wonder Master Ho dotes on Miss 3 so much. It turns out that Miss 3 would even give up her own life for Master Ho. It's really intolerable if I don't treat her well. Yu Xiang's movements were too fast. In addition, her body was stiff from kneeling all night. Yu Pinyin didn't manage to stop her in time. He snatched the dagger from her hand and angrily roared, "What are you doing? Are you crazy? Are you feeling sorry for me? Can you understand how I feel when I see you kneeling on the ground?" Yu Xiang scratched her wound and made more blood flow. She tearfully ordered, "You come back with me right now. You're not allowed to come back in the future. Do you hear me? Otherwise, I'll completely destroy your legs." As she spoke, she pushed away Tao Hong and Lu Lu, who were trying to bandage her wound. Yu Pinyin couldn't do anything to her. He could only tear off his clothes and bandage her bleeding wound. He compromised and said, "I hear you. Let's go home now." Yu Xiang was satisfied. She forcefully pinched the flesh on the back of his hand and then raised her voice to shout into the Zhenghua temple, "Ku Hui, listen to me. You want my brother to lay down his butcher's knife and wash away the sins of killing. Who knows how many people of the great Han dynasty would be caught in the flames of war and blood would flow like rivers if he didn't fight hard to protect the country. Without him punishing the corrupt officials, how many people would be wronged and wouldn't have a door to heaven or to hell? He single-handedly protected the lives of millions of people. Whether what he did was a sin of killing or good deeds, the Buddha will decide. It's not up to you to judge. Moreover, I'm the one who broke my leg. I'm also the one who's seeking medical treatment. Whether you want to save me or not is all up to you. What does it have to do with my brother? If you don't see your past all day, you'll cut off your path to becoming a sage. If you talk about your past all day, you'll hurt the harmony of heaven and earth. Ku Hui, you'll cut off your path to becoming a sage and hurt the harmony of heaven and earth. No matter how many good deeds you do in the future and how much suffering you suffer, it won't make up for it. Go back to Tianzhu and cultivate for a few more decades." After saying this, she waved at the imperial bodyguards and said, "Carry your Master Ho onto the carriage." The imperial bodyguards complied and hurriedly carried their master onto the carriage that had been waiting for a long time by the roadside. Just as Yu Xiang was carried onto the carriage by Tao Hong and Lu Lu, Ku Hui walked out quickly and shouted, "Benefactor, please wait." Yu Xiang's words were like a knife stabbing into his heart, making him feel ashamed and regretful. How could Yu Xiang stay when her brother's kneecap was injured to such an extent? She sternly scolded the coachman to quickly leave. When she turned the carriage around, she lifted the curtain and gave the embarrassed Ku Hui the middle finger. What's the meaning of this? Ku Hui looked on helplessly as the carriage drove away. He turned his head and asked his senior marshal brother who had followed him out. Kulhai rubbed his bald head and guessed, "It probably means that your cultivation level isn't high enough. Otherwise, she would have given you a thumbs up. Junior marshal brother, you've been painstakingly cultivating in Tianzhu for 5 years. Do you still not understand? There are Buddhas everywhere in the world. All living beings are Buddhas. You shouldn't judge people with evil thoughts, and you shouldn't reject people because of anger. These past few years of cultivation have been wasted. Moreover, didn't you painstakingly study medicine to help the world and save the people? Why can't you save benefactor you? You're too narrow-minded. Senior marshal brother is right. Junior marshal brother is ashamed. But now that things have come to this, what should we do?" Ku Hui smiled bitterly. "I'll immediately send the young novice monk to deliver an invitation to benefactor you. For my sake, I'm sure she'll come back." Kuhai put his palms together and chanted Amitabha. Chapter 109. Yu Xiang anxiously led her brother back to the small courtyard. First, she treated her wound. Luckily, it wasn't deep, so the bleeding stopped very quickly after she applied some medicine. Moreover, it showed signs of healing. Yu Pinyin reached out several times to help her bandage her wound, but she fiercely pushed him away. Her expression was full of disgust. Tao Hong was carrying a basin of hot water, while Lu Lu was using a cloth towel to carefully wipe the bruises on Master Ho's knees. Tell them to heat up the fire. Big Brother's face is pale from the cold. Can't you see? Yu Xiang put a pile of medicine on the bedside table and climbed onto the soft couch with her arms propped up. Yu Pinyin hurriedly pulled her into his arms, but she fiercely pinched his arm. You kneel when others tell you to. Do you still have any dignity? Don't you know that men have gold under their knees? If something bad happens to you, what do you want me to do? As Yu Xiang spoke, her tears came out again. Her thick eyelashes were covered with sparkling tears. Seeing this, Yu Pinyin's heart throbbed with pain. Good girl, don't cry. Big Brother has been practicing martial arts since he was young. It's just a kneel. It's not as serious as you say. Yu Pinyin rubbed her earlobe, trying to change the topic. What do you mean? He raised his middle finger. What the F***ck, Yu Xiang's anger rose from her heart. Yu Pinyin was stunned. After a short while, he used his finger to rub his sister's lips. His tone was very helpless. How can a girl be so rude? You're not allowed to do this gesture again. Don't worry. I've only done this to Ku Hui. I'm so angry that I'm dizzy. She threw herself into her brother's arms, holding him and gently rocking him. After a while, she let go and focused on applying medicine to him. Yu Pinyin didn't feel any pain. On the other hand, Yu Xiang was grimacing and gasping from time to time. Yu Pinyin wanted to laugh, but he also felt his heart burning. His eyes were glued to her face and he couldn't look away. After applying the medicine, Yu Xiang pressed her brother down, covered him with the quilt, and ordered him to quickly go to sleep. However, she saw Tao Hong running in with a letter. Miss, Master Kuhai sent you a letter. Quickly take a look. Yu Pinyin quickly took the post and read it. He smiled happily. Master Kuhai invites you to come up the mountain tomorrow. I think Master Ku Hui has already agreed to treat your leg. Yu Xiang snatched the invitation and crumpled it into a ball. He said coldly, I'm not going. If I go, who knows what other tests await you. Yu Pinyin hugged her and whispered, let's go. We should at least go and take a look. If you go with me, it won't be as simple as just taking a look. If they ask you to go through a mountain of swords or a sea of fire, you'll probably agree. I'm not going. I'm fine like this. Wherever I go, I have you hugging me. No one is more comfortable than me. Yu Xiang hugged her brother's neck. Her tone was coquettish, and her eyes were bright. There was no trace of annoyance. Yu Pinyin gently pecked her lips. After repeating it several times, he bit her earlobe and whispered, this isn't good. When I'm hugging you, I hope that your legs can wrap around my waist tightly, and not be completely numb like this. Yu Xiang instantly understood the true meaning of the word hug when her butt was pressed against something hard. The image of her legs wrapped around her brother's thin waist appeared in her mind. Her cheeks were as red as the sunset. If a ladle of water was poured on her, smoke would come out of the top of her head. You're really shameless. She licked her lips and gave him a charming look. All right, I'll go. Let's make it clear first. If they ask you to kneel again, I won't treat you. If my legs are healed, but your legs are crippled, I'll immediately run away with someone else. Do you believe me? She made threatening gestures. Yu Pinyin's eyes darkened. He covered her red lips that made him love and hate her. In the end, Ku Hui was a famous person. The news of him returning to Zhenghua Temple spread throughout the capital in the afternoon. The matriarch hurriedly sent someone to call the siblings. In the end, she found out that her grandson's request for medical treatment had been rejected. Forget it. With Master Kohai's invitation, there should be a glimmer of hope. Let Mama prepare. Tomorrow morning, our whole family will go together. The matriarch made the decision. The next day, Prefecture Yu, old and young, were all present. Even the elusive Yu Miaoqi stood beside the carriage and waited. Yu Pinyin rode a horse in front as a guard. The matriarch and her 3 granddaughters sat in the same carriage. Xiang'er, if Master Ku Hui continues to make things difficult for you, old ancestor will go and kneel. No matter what, we have to treat your legs. The matriarch, who had been resting with her eyes closed, suddenly opened her mouth. Her tone was unusually resolute. Yu Siyu hurriedly dissuaded her, old ancestor, you're already so old. How can you kneel? Let me do it. I don't believe that Master Ku Hui would be so heartless as to make things difficult for us mentally handicapped women. Yu Xiang was very moved. She held their hands and said, no one is allowed to kneel. If he deliberately makes things difficult for you, I won't treat your legs. I've already been through it all these years. I've already gotten used to it. If he wants to treat it or not, then let him. Yu Miaoqi covered her mouth and laughed mockingly, you say it so nicely. When you get to Zhenghua Temple, don't cry and beg people. No one will think you're mute if you don't say a few words. The matriarch suddenly slammed the table and angrily rebuked. If it was in the past, Yu Miaoqi would have already been scared into silence and trembled. Today, however, she only curled her lips and her face was full of disdain. It was as if the matriarch was just an ant to her. She could obliterate her with a flick of her finger. Yu Xiang immediately sensed that something was amiss. She discreetly sized her up. Ever since the Lin clan left, Yu Miaoqi had practically lived with her tail between her legs. It had been a long time since she had such a confident appearance. Did she find a way out? Or did she have a stronger backer than her older brother? Thinking of the plot in the original work where Yu Miaoqi ascended to the position of empress, Yu Xiang's heart trembled. While she was thinking, the carriage arrived at the entrance of Zhenghua Temple. Kohai and Ku Hui personally came to greet them. The group of people sat down in a simple but imposing meditation room. Kohai immediately apologized to the siblings on behalf of his junior brother. Yu Xiang waved her hand and said in a mocking tone, the fault does not lie with Master Kohai. We don't dare to accept this apology. Amitabha Buddha, the fault lies with this poor monk. Benefactor Yu, please forgive this one. Ku Hui immediately sat up and sincerely clasped his hands to apologize. Yu Xiang stared straight at him and sneered, this is Master Ku Hui. What a young man. It's said that monks are merciful, so how can Master Ku Hui be so cold-blooded and heartless? On this mountain, there are believers who kneel 3 times and kowtow 9 times when they come to make a pilgrimage. They do it with hot blood and sincerity. It's the purest and most supreme faith that comes from the depths of their hearts. However, Master Ku Hui personally blasphemed this faith by forcing my older brother to kneel on the mountain peak in the dead of winter. If my older brother hadn't practiced martial arts since he was a child and had a strong body, I'm afraid his legs would have been crippled. I'd like to ask, is Master Ku Hui a Buddha or an Asura? How could he harm my older brother to this extent? Although my older brother's hands are indeed stained with blood, he has protected the country and punished traitors. The number of people he has saved is not limited to just tens of thousands. I'd like to ask Master Ku Hui again. You've cultivated for more than 20 years. Can you save more people than my older brother? If not, what qualifications do you have to convert him? These words were truly sarcastic. Every sentence hit the nail on the head, but no one could refute them. Kohai's expression was solemn and her eyes were filled with shame. Ku Hui couldn't even raise his head. Amitabha Buddha, this poor monk knows his mistake. Benefactor's legs will be treated by this poor monk. This poor monk will definitely do his best. He was silent for a long time, but in the end, he prostrated himself on the ground. Yu Xiang still wasn't willing to let it go, but her left and right hands were held back by old madam and Yu Pinyin. She had no choice but to let it go with a light snort. Yu Xiu tilted her head to look at her, her eyes full of worship. Yu Miaoqi quietly clenched her fists. Her heart was filled with intense hatred. She originally thought that Yu Xiang could only be a cripple for the rest of her life, but she didn't expect that Master Ku Hui would actually come back and spare no effort to save her. God was so unfair. Old Madam and Yu Pinyin also prostrated themselves on the ground. Afterwards, they made an appointment with Ku Hui to come to the Fu to check her pulse the next day. They briefly talked about Buddhist principles. Seeing that it was getting late, they said their goodbyes and left. As they walked out of the courtyard, they happened to see someone spinning the 50,000 lot pot. Old Madam immediately smiled and pointed at the lot pot. Xiang, do you still remember? That year, before the bamboo lot fell to the ground, you picked the lot king in the air and gave everyone a fright. Yu Xiang nodded. Master Kuhai said, Benefactor Yu Xiang not only has fate with Buddhism, but also has profound good fortune and unparalleled luck. Naturally, she is the lot king. If benefactors are interested, you can go and try. The lot king will be this poor monk's guest in the future. You can come and discuss Buddhism with this poor monk at any time. This poor monk will definitely welcome you with open arms. Yu Pinyin had no interest in Buddhism, so she was naturally unmoved. Old Madam, Yu Xiu, and Yu Miaoqi were eager to give it a try. When the person in front of them finished spinning the lot pot, they immediately surrounded her. Both Old Madam and Yu Xiu only picked small lots. When it was Yu Miaoqi's turn, she took several deep breaths before touching the lot pot. If Yu Xiang can pick the lot king, why can't I? She thought to herself, full of unwillingness. Ah, what a pity. When she finished, Yu Xiang went over to check. She immediately covered her mouth and laughed, her eyes full of ridicule. You really have no good fortune. Put it down, it's time to go home. Seeing Yu Miaoqi almost breaking the lot, Old Madam frowned and sighed. Kuhai took a few steps forward to size up Yu Miaoqi. After a short while, he put his palms together and sincerely warned, all living beings are obsessed with the image of unreality. Therefore, it's called unreality. It said that it's because of the image of unreality. Perhaps it's hard to know whether it's fake or not, but if you keep thinking, it'll disturb your heart. Benefactor, you've been haunted by unreality. You've suffered a lot in the world in vain. Today, there was an endless stream of people who came to worship Buddha. There were even more people around the lot pot. It was fine if she didn't pick the lot king, but she didn't expect Kuhai to make such a derogatory comment. Someone immediately recognized Yu Miaoqi and spread the word about her embezzling grandmother's share to buy poison dates. Everyone was in an uproar, thinking that Master Kuhai's face-reading technique was indeed accurate. Not only was Yu Miaoqi ashamed to death, but even Old Madam felt ashamed. She could only push her granddaughter forward and say, Xiang, you also picked the lot. Everyone in the capital knew that Yu Xiang had picked the lot king. When they saw her come forward, they immediately stopped the clamor and stared at her hand as she spun the lot pot. Just like last time, Yu Xiang didn't wait for the lot to fall to the ground. She casually picked up the lot king in the air. When she looked at it, she was stunned. Master Kuhai laughed and said, Amitabha. Benefactor Yu Xiang is indeed fated with Buddha. Good, good. Chapter 110. The next day, Ku Hui arrived at the Marquis household as promised. He held Yu Xiang's wrist and carefully checked his pulse. A quarter of an hour later, seeing his thoughtful expression, the matriarch asked somewhat anxiously, Great Master, can Xiang'er's leg be treated? Ku Hui did not answer. Instead, he bent down to take off Yu Xiang's embroidered shoes, but Yu Pinyin forcefully grabbed his wrist. Facing his cold gaze, even though Ku Hui had been worshipping Buddha since he was 2 years old, he still felt shaken and cold. He hurriedly explained, "Benefactor Yu, this penniless monk only wants to take a look at Benefactor Yu Xiang's wound. Only then can it help with the diagnosis. Men and women should not touch each other." Yu Pinyin warned him word by word. Ku Hui smiled bitterly, "Benefactor Yu is thinking too much. This penniless monk only sees patients, not men and women. The 4 most basic methods of diagnosis are looking, listening, questioning, and feeling the pulse. If you don't allow this penniless monk to examine the wound, I'm afraid there will be a deviation in the treatment of Benefactor Yu Xiang." Yu Pinyin frowned and slowly let go. Ku Hui glanced at his slightly red and swollen wrist and could only shake his head and smile bitterly. Although Yu Xiang had lived in the Great Han Dynasty for 5 years, he was still a modern man. He did not place much importance on the separation between men and women. While the two were arguing, he had automatically taken off his embroidered shoes and rolled up his trousers. He pointed at his knee and said, "Look. That year, a knife cut across my kneecap. This is the scar." The scar was very long. When it was cut down diagonally, it actually chopped off both of his legs. Although 5 years had passed, the hideous scar was still faintly visible. What a bloody scene it was at that time. The matriarch lowered her head and wiped her tears. Yu Pinyin's expression was gloomy. Yu Xiyu and Yu Miaoqi were so scared that they turned their heads away, not daring to look. Ku Hui smiled at Yu Xiang. Only then did he crouch down and repeatedly examine the wound. He even used his fingers to massage it and then used a small hammer to hit the kneecap. Seeing this, Yu Xiang could not help but laugh. This monk was quite professional. After the examination, Ku Hui straightened up and sat in front of the table to write down the prescription. Yu Pinyin helped his sister pull up her trousers and put on her embroidered shoes. He asked, "Master, can my sister's legs be treated?" Ku Hui answered without raising his head, "There's still treatment. Thanks to the medicinal oil you used to massage her legs for the past 5 years, the meridians in her legs were preserved." After he finished writing the prescription and handed it to Lulu, he looked embarrassed. "This poor monk is 70% sure that I can cure her, but I need to break her legs and reconnect them. I need to apply the bone-healing ointment that I developed in recent years externally. After 2 months of applying it together with acupuncture, Benefactor Yu Xiang may be able to stand up again." "What? You actually want to break his leg?" The old lady held her forehead and almost fainted. Yu Pinyin's face was so gloomy that water could drip from it. He stared at Ku Hui with a gaze that was like a boneless steel knife. He wanted nothing more than to skin him alive. What kind of torture was it to break his leg and reattach it? Not to mention that Xiang'er was spoiled since childhood, even a strong man with rough skin and thick flesh wouldn't be able to withstand it. Yu Xiyu was so scared that her face turned white. She turned her head slightly and saw that Yu Miaoqi was covering her mouth and laughing. Ku Hui felt his scalp go numb from Yu Pinyin's stare, but in order to cure the illness, he had to repeat himself. "That's right. You need to break her legs from the kneecaps and then reattach them. This is the so-called, without breaking, there can be no construction. After breaking, there can be construction." As the person involved, Yu Xiang's expression was the calmest. She didn't say a word. She took out a handkerchief from her sleeve, folded it into a strip, and stuffed it into her mouth. Then she lifted her legs and placed them on the table. She said vaguely, "Come on. Be more nimble. Don't break my legs the first time. If you do it a second time or a third time, I'll go crazy and scold you." Ku Hui never expected that such a delicate girl would have such courage and insight. She even surpassed her grandmother and brother. Although he admired her greatly, he couldn't help but laugh. He waved his hand and said, "Benefactor Yu Xiang, you don't need to be like this. I have a medicine here called mefizin. After you drink it, you'll fall into a deep sleep. When you wake up, your legs will have been reattached and the medicine will have been applied. You really don't need to endure the pain of your broken bones. Why didn't you tell me earlier that you had mefizin? Yuxiang spat out the handkerchief and rejoiced. Yu Pinyan's heartstrings suddenly relaxed. He placed his hands on his younger sister's shoulders and forcefully squeezed them. Ku Hui didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He handed the prescription to the maidservant and ordered her to boil it immediately. About half an hour later, Yuxiang had fallen asleep with her head tilted to the side. The matriarch and her 2 granddaughters were waiting outside the door. Ku Hui wiped his palms with strong wine. However, he saw that Yu Pinyan was also dipping her hands into the wine jar. Her expression was very grave and stern. Benefactor Yu, what are you? He originally thought that as a relative, Commandant Yu definitely wouldn't be able to do it. I'll do it. You just need to guide me from the side. This matter concerned his younger sister's life. Even if his heart was beating wildly, his blood was flowing in reverse, and even his fingertips were beginning to tremble, he still wouldn't leave his younger sister's safety in the hands of an outsider. Ku Hui obeyed and retreated to the side. He pointed at Dao Ba's location and said, "Start breaking the bones here. Remember, the smoother the fracture, the better." Yu Pinyan nodded and secretly took a deep breath. Then, he stretched out his hand and pinched and twisted. With 2 crisp cracking sounds, the bones had already broken. Ku Hui hurriedly stepped forward and used his finger to examine the fracture. The fracture was very neat, as if it had been cut by a sharp blade. The strength and technique were truly exquisite. Good, very good. Now, I'll reconnect Benefactor Yu Xiang's dislocated bones and apply bone healing ointment. She'll be able to stand up in 2 or 3 months. Ku Hui quickly set the bones and then applied the black ointment to Yu Xiang's slightly swollen kneecap. Yu Pinyan slowly walked out of the hall and spat out a mouthful of turbid air towards the gloomy sky. His hands were stained with so much blood. For the first time, he actually felt lucky for his skillful killing techniques. At least with him doing it, he could reduce his younger sister's pain to a minimum. Seeing him come out, the old lady hurriedly asked, "How is it? Has the bone been reconnected?" "It's been reconnected." As soon as Yu Pinyan's voice fell, he felt a sharp pain in his kneecap. It wasn't because of yesterday's kneeling, but because he felt the same pain as his younger sister. If he could, he wished he could take her place. Amitabha. With Buddha's blessing, Xiang'er will definitely recover. She's very lucky. The old lady clasped her hands together and chanted. Kohai finished applying the ointment and promised to come back 3 days later to change the bandages. Then, he bid farewell and left. Yu Xiang didn't wake up until midnight. When she opened her eyes, she saw her older brother lying on his side beside her. His eyes were faintly bloodshot. "Brother, have you been watching over me all day?" Yu Xiang reached out to touch his cheek. However, because the ointment had worn off, her legs hurt so much that she trembled. Yu Pinyan hurriedly held her cold fingertips and said anxiously, "What's wrong with Xiang'er? Is it starting to hurt again?" "Wait a moment. Master Ku Hui left a few painkillers. I'll go get them now." "No, let it hurt." Yu Xiang grabbed his sleeve and forced a smile. "Pain is a good thing. It's been 5 years and it's finally feeling something again. I want to experience it properly." Yu Pinyan's eyes were sorrowful. He slowly lay back beside her and wiped away the fine beads of cold sweat on her forehead. He rubbed her little head in his arms and sighed silently. Yu Xiang rubbed against his warm chest longingly. Then, she raised her head and pointed at her pale lips. She pleaded, "Kiss me and hug me. It won't hurt anymore." Yu Pinyan's eyes darkened. He slowly lowered his head. First, he wet her dry lips with the tip of his tongue. Then, he pried open her snow-white teeth and gently sucked inch by inch. Yuxiang was very dissatisfied with his gentle sucking. Her little hand pressed against the back of his head and she desperately sucked the saliva in his mouth. It was as if she wanted to swallow him whole. Yu Pinyin couldn't stand the entanglement of her small, fragrant tongue. He followed her intense rhythm and kept changing his angle. After the kiss, Yu Pinyin panted and asked, "Why are you desperately sucking my saliva? Are you thirsty?" Yuxiang licked her crimson lips in satisfaction. Her voice was soft. "That's not saliva. It's my miraculous elixir. Eating it can make me temporarily forget the pain." She frowned and thought for a moment. Then, she added, "It can make me forget the pain for at least 15 minutes. Yu Pinyin couldn't help but laugh. He rubbed her little head in his arms and sighed. "Little girl, you have so many tricks up your sleeves. Does it really not hurt anymore?" "It really doesn't hurt anymore." Yuxiang hugged his thin waist. Her voice was calm. 15 minutes later, she began to squirm again. She pouted her red lips and begged, "Hurry up and kiss me. It hurts." Yu Pinyin hurriedly lowered his head and kissed her. After a long time, he reluctantly separated. After repeated this process, Yuxiang fell asleep in the intense pain. Her face was peaceful and beautiful, as if the greatest pain was nothing to her. Yu Pinyin tenderly stroked her hair and laughed softly. This was his little girl. His little sweetheart, his little sapling. No matter how difficult the situation was, she was able to turn the bitterness of life into sweetness. She could nourish herself and comfort others. He devoutly planted a kiss on her forehead and fell into a deep sleep together with her. Ku Hui's medical skills were indeed worthy of his reputation. 2 months later, Yuxiang was actually able to support herself with her arms and take 2 steps. Exercise more in the future and you'll slowly be able to walk. This poor monk will write a list. Exercise according to the items on the list every day. Don't be lazy, and don't be greedy. Ku Hui earnestly instructed as he wrote. Yuxiang nodded. Yu Pinyin took the list and carefully put it away. Since then, Prefecture Yu had become lively. Every day, Tao Hong and Lu Lu's screams of surprise and shock could be heard. Yu Pinyin took out 2 hours every day to exercise with his sister. From the initial 2 steps, they gradually progressed to walking more than 10 steps. At the end of the year, Yu Pinyin began to be busy. It was common for him to not return home for several days. Yuxiang took advantage of the time when he wasn't home to practice with all her might. She wanted to give him a surprise. 3 days before the new year, Emperor Qing Kong finally announced that he would stop writing. Only then did Yu Pinyin drag his tired body back home. Tao Hong took advantage of the moment when he returned to his room to change his clothes and quickly ran to his master's ear and whispered, "Miss, guess who I saw on the street today?" "Who?" Yuxiang used her walking stick to move forward step by step. "I saw a second miss and a man drinking tea on the 2nd floor of Xiang Shui Pavilion. That man was very handsome and had an outstanding temperament. He must have an illustrious background." "A man. Illustrious background?" Yuxiang muttered to herself. She guessed that this person must be a prince. She wasn't making wild guesses. She was making a judgment based on the plot. Although Yu Miaoqi's current situation was miserable, she was still the female lead. She still had a bit of luck. However, the 4th prince, the 5th prince, and the 6th prince were about the same age. Their appearances were also very handsome. Without seeing the real person, she couldn't guess who it was. Chapter 111. Yuxiang didn't have the ability to deal with the other princes, but he could target Yu Miaoqi. After thinking it over, she decided to take drastic measures and marry off Yu Miaoqi, this scourge, as soon as possible. Based on her current hatred for family Yu, the higher she climbed, the crueler her methods of revenge would be in the future. Yu Xiang definitely wouldn't give her a chance to turn things around. There were still a few days until the new year, but the servants had already taken out red silk to decorate the courtyard. The lanterns in the corridor had all been replaced with new ones. From afar, it looked like a festive scene. The matriarch ordered Mama Ma to buy a lot of red paper and called all of her grandchildren to the main hall to write couplets and draw the characters of fortune. Yu Xiang's palms were raw from practicing walking, so he could only sit to the side and watch. However, she wasn't willing to stop. She stretched out her index and middle fingers and moved them around her brother's shoulders as if she was walking. This made his heart itch unbearably. He dripped several blobs of ink on the red paper and ruined a few couplets. When she received her brother's warning gaze, she covered her mouth and chuckled. She picked up a malt candy and bit it between her teeth. She even used her tongue to play with the candy and swayed it up and down. Her bright little eyes burned directly at her brother's lips. Yu Pinyan's lower abdomen seemed to have a ball of fire burning. His already dark eyes darkened. He wanted nothing more than to catch the little minx and swallow the candy and her naughty little tongue into his stomach. "Aya, big brother, you dirted another couplet. Have you been too tired recently? You can't even hold a pen properly." Yu pulled over the Spring Festival couplet that was stained with ink. Her expression was full of regret. "I've been a bit tired recently." Yu Pinyan rubbed between his brows. Yu Xiang bit off the candy with a crunch and giggled. After laughing, she stretched the remaining half of the candy to her brother's mouth and coaxed, "Here, if you're tired, eat a candy to replenish your energy. It's very sweet." Yu Pinyan looked at her deeply, then rolled the candy into his mouth and crushed it. His burning gaze never left his sister. Yu Miaoqi was also in a good mood. While writing couplets, she hummed a song. Not only did she attract the attention of Yu Xiang and the others, but even the old madam also looked at her several times. "Grandmother, after I finish writing the couplets, I will send some to mother. After all, it's going to be the new year soon. She's going to be lonely in the Lin residence." She picked up the couplet she was most satisfied with and smiled like a flower. Without waiting for the old lady to nod, Yu Xiang spoke first. "Yu Miaoqi, why are you so happy today? Have you found your in-laws?" "Your horoscope should be Yu Xiang's, and Yu Xiang's horoscope should be yours. This is your horoscope." Back then, I had someone calculate it. The words that followed gradually died down, and the faces of the members of the Lin clan turned pale with fright. "You found someone to read your fortune. What about it?" Yu Miaoqi's heart that had just been put down was once again raised high. "It's been so long, I've long forgotten about it. I vaguely remember it's just words like unparalleled riches and honor. My daughter is naturally blessed." The Lin clan's smile was rather forced, and his eyes flickered with uncertainty. After receiving her daughter, she was so happy that she was dizzy with joy. She didn't even realize that Yu Xiang's fate should have belonged to her daughter. The so-called heavenly calamity star was referring to her daughter. Her husband died because of her daughter, not because of Yu Xiang. This knowledge kept hitting her already fragile mental defenses, causing her to lose control of her mind. How could Yu Miaoqi not see her abnormality? She grabbed her wrist and sternly questioned, "You're lying, aren't you? What did that fortune teller say? Is my fate really that of a heavenly calamity star as the matriarch said? That's impossible." The Lin clan suppressed the palpitations in his heart and comforted her, "Don't let your imagination run wild. You're the legitimate daughter of the Marquis family. You were born to enjoy wealth and honor. How could you be that kind of person with a bitter life? That fortune teller is a liar, a fraud. Let's find another expert to read it." Let's go, we'll go to the Zhengguo temple to find Master Kohai. As soon as he finished speaking, he pulled his daughter onto the carriage. Yu Miaoqi's heart surged with infinite hope, and he ordered the coachman to speed up to the Zhengguo temple. Under the guise of Yu Xiang, the two of them went to the meditation room where Kohai cultivated and handed over the birth certificate. This poor monk has seen this birth certificate before. Kohai gave it a cursory glance and immediately said, "Great master, where have you seen it before? What kind of fate is this?" The Lin clan licked his dry lips, his heart thumping wildly. 5 years ago, Matriarch Yu came to inquire with this birth certificate. Kohai turned to look at Yu Miaoqi. He put his palms together and said with compassion, "Amitabha. This poor monk has a word of advice for this benefactor, as the saying goes, endure hardships and defend hard work, and prosper. Although it's superficial, it's true, but the noble heart is not easy to change. Keep moving forward, even life and death can't affect you. Benefactor's fate may be bitter, but you can eliminate it with kindness and virtue. Sooner or later, there will be a day when you will leave Kohai." The Lin clan was completely paralyzed on the praying mat. He covered his face and wept. Since this birth certificate was asked by Master Kohai, it couldn't be wrong. His own daughter was actually the star of death he had repeatedly scolded for more than 10 years. How laughable, how sad. Yu Miaoqi was stunned for a few breaths before coming back to her senses. She said calmly, "Then great master, can you help me look at the other birth certificate?" Then she reported her own birth certificate, which originally belonged to Yu Xiang. Kohai closed his eyes and calculated. After a moment, he smiled and said, "This birth certificate is really wonderful. It's actually in the Tianfu Xingzhen Palace at the right time. Although there were many misfortunes in the early years, after the age of 16, one's good fortune will continue and become rich and noble." Yu Miaoqi couldn't listen anymore. She got up and left, slamming the door. The Lin clan hurriedly apologized to Kohai. The two returned to the carriage and didn't speak for a long time. Seeing that the Zhengguo temple was getting farther and farther away, the Lin clan said faintly, "Son, when the fourth prince asks for your hand in marriage in the future, they will have to exchange birth certificates. I'm afraid your fate is." Chapter 112. After returning from the Lin residence, Yu Miaoqi locked herself in her room and refused to see anyone. She only came to the main hall on the night of the New Year's Eve dinner. When the old madam saw her, she only greeted her indifferently, as if she didn't see her haggard complexion. After the New Year's Eve dinner, they played cards for a while. Seeing that the sky was dark and the sound of firecrackers could be heard everywhere in the city, the old madam waved her hand and said, "Let's go out and drive away the Nian beasts." The so-called driving away the Nian beasts was like setting off firecrackers. Other households naturally had servants do it for them, but at the Marquis household, Yu Pinyin did it personally. She ordered people to bring a large box of cannons and lit them one by one and threw them into the sky. Although Yu Xiang's leg was broken, she was spoiled by Yu Pinyin and became even more unrestrained. She held an incense stick in her left hand and a 2-finger-thick cannon in her right hand. She lit the cannons one by one and threw them into the lotus pond. Bang, bang, bang. The loud sounds shook the ice in the pond and broke large holes. There were even fish that were blown out of the ice and flipped over their white bellies. Hurry up and catch them. Tonight's supper is grilled fish. She lay by the lotus pond and ordered Tao Hong and Lu Lu to use a net to catch the fish. Yu Siyu looked on enviously and asked her for a cannon. She also wanted to set off some fish. "You have to be careful. You know Liuzi, the gatekeeper in the backyard who is missing 3 fingers, right?" Yu Xiang waved her hand and said with a strange smile, his fingers were blown off because he didn't throw the cannon in time. Yu Siyu's heart trembled. She hurriedly threw out the unlit cannon. Coincidentally, it fell into Lulu's net. Lulu was so scared that she screamed. She threw away the net and waited for a long time. When she saw that there was no movement, she realized that the firecracker was not lit at all. They looked at each other in dismay, as if relieved of a heavy burden. Yu Xiang, on the other hand, slapped his wheelchair and laughed until tears came out of his eyes. The old lady stood in the corridor and looked at the courtyard decorated with lanterns and colored banners. She felt that this year was the happiest year in Prefecture Yu. Although there were many twists and turns in the past, at the end of the year, there was finally a new atmosphere. Look, your leg is so skinny even though it hasn't recovered yet. If your leg recovers, won't you be able to flip the roof and flip the roof tiles? The old lady pointed at her granddaughter who had started to fry fish again. Although she was reprimanding her, there was a hint of affection on her face. Let her be. It's just a few fish. Yu Pinyin stared at his sister with a slight smile. How many fish? I spent a lot of money to buy the lion head koi from Yangzhou. Yu Pinyin raised his eyebrows and took a few steps forward. A little further. A little further. It wasn't until Yu Pinyin's back was almost pressed against the pitch-black rockery that Yu Xiang nodded and said, "Okay, that's enough. Brother, stand there and don't move. I have a New Year gift for you." Yu Pinyin looked at her quietly, his eyes filled with anticipation. Yu Xiang supported herself on the handrail and slowly stood up. She stared unblinkingly at her brother with her big eyes that sparkled like stars. Then, she slowly took the first step, the second step, the third step. The goose feather like snow dyed the gravel path white. A trail of footprints appeared on the snowy ground, extending towards the youth who was standing stiffly and had almost forgotten to breathe. Closer, closer, when there were only 3 to 4 meters left, Yu Xiang suddenly sped up and staggered into the arms of the young man, who had already spread out his arms. The strong impact sent the young man flying backward, then he fell into the fake mountain cave behind him. The youth's back was pressed against the cold rock, but there was a warm body in his arms. A delicate fragrance dispersed the damp and cold air in the cave, leaving behind only the warmth of spring. Do you feel it? Is it tight? Yu Xiang's legs were wrapped around her brother's waist. She twisted her waist and asked. The palm of his hand was supporting his sister's round and perky buttocks. The two's most private parts were tightly pressed together. Not only were their breaths intertwined, but even their body temperature was transmitted through the fabric. His sister had said such suggestive words. A few blue veins popped out on Yu Pinyin's forehead. He felt that he would die in the hands of this little minx sooner or later. However, he gladly endured it and couldn't help but chuckle. He nibbled on her bright red lips and said vaguely, "It can be tighter." The response he received was a pair of legs wrapped tighter around his waist and a fiery kiss. The two of them crazily exchanged saliva. The snowflakes that constantly drifted into the cave couldn't cool down the burning desire in their hearts. Tao Hong and Lu Lu had been waiting outside the cave for a long time. When they saw that they were about to freeze into ice sculptures, they shouted in a trembling voice, "Miss, Master Ho, it's time to go back. It's too cold outside. Be careful not to catch a cold." Yu Pinyin reluctantly pulled away. He tidied up his sister's messy hair and whispered, "Let's go. Be careful not to catch a cold." "I'm not cold at all. Look, my palms are sweating." Yu Xiang spread out her wet little hands. Yu Pinyin immediately grasped them and lowered his head to kiss them. Then he took off his cloak and wrapped her tightly before walking out. "Wait." Yu Xiang grabbed his lapel and warned, "You can't tell anyone that I can walk, especially old ancestor." "Why not?" Yu Pinyin frowned slightly. "If anyone knows, how can you openly hug me in the future? You're so stupid." Yu Xiang poked his chest with her fingertips. Yu Pinyin chuckled and bit her delicate cheek. His voice contained a thick sweetness and pampering that couldn't be dissolved. "You little minx, you really know how to think. Okay, Big Brother won't tell anyone. Big Brother will hug you forever." Only then was Yu Xiang satisfied. She bit his face as well. After the new year, the old lady began to prepare the dowry for her 2 granddaughters. Although Yu Miaoqi was younger than Yu Xiyu, her wedding date was set before hers. From this, it could be seen that the old lady was anxious to marry her off. Yu Miaoqi became more anxious day by day. She often wandered outside Yu Pinyan's study, but when she saw the guards patrolling back and forth, she hurriedly avoided them. As a result, at the end of March, her wedding date was approaching. On this day, a horse suddenly galloped through the city gate. Before the guards could stop it, the soldier on the horse shouted, "Get out of the way, it's an emergency. The Westerny people are attacking Ulan Chabu." The guards were shocked and quickly opened the city gate to let him pass. Emperor Qing Kong immediately convened a court meeting to discuss the war with the ministers. Originally, General Xiong Chonghai was stationed at Ulan Chabu. However, he was old and suffering from a hidden illness. A month ago, he asked his bones to retire and return to his hometown. The general who replaced him did not have any talent. This allowed the Westerny people to take advantage of this loophole. The other generals were also over 50 years old. Although they all asked to fight, Emperor Qing Kong was not completely relieved. Seeing the emperor's clear eyes looking straight at him, Yu Pinyan bowed slightly and stepped forward to ask to fight. Emperor Qing Kong said yes and threw the general of Agile Cavalry's seal over, which was firmly caught by him. The ministers suddenly remembered that Commander Yu was not only the commander of the army, but also the general of Agile Cavalry who commanded millions of troops. At the age of 16, he became famous throughout the world with his 100 victories. He was the famous god of war of the great Han dynasty. Over the years, he killed people like Scything Flax and made countless enemies. Everyone gradually remembered his fierce name and forgot his achievements. The ministers were speechless for a while. The emergency at the border was such a big matter. The old lady was the first to know, and her heart faintly tightened. She put down the scriptures and sighed to her granddaughter who was accompanying her. "Xiang'er, I'm afraid your brother will have to go to war again." Yu Xiang's hand accidentally broke the prayer beads. Her expression was frightened. "Recite the scriptures. Try to recite the scriptures 7 times 7, 49 times before your brother leaves. Then tie a knot and let your brother wear it." The old lady took out a copper coin covered with rust from the box and placed it in her granddaughter's palm. This was a habit that the grandmother and granddaughter had developed in their early years. Whenever Yu Pinyan went to war, they would find a copper coin to pray for blessings and let Yu Pinyan carry it with him to ward off evil spirits. Yu Xiang's throat was choked, and her eyes were red. This was not the first time her brother went to war, but her mood was more uncomfortable than ever before. Her sweet life had not yet begun, but she had to face separation. It was more likely that she would be separated by life and death. She suddenly lost the courage to face the future alone. Chapter 113. Yu Pinyan didn't return home until midnight. The lights in the main courtyard were still on, so the old lady was waiting for him. "You're back. When are you leaving?" The old lady supported her forehead with one hand and supported herself with a cane with the other. She looked old and haggard. "Tonight, I'll go to the Agile Cavalry Battalion to count the soldiers. When I finish counting, I'll leave." Yu Pinyan helped her to sit on the soft couch. The old lady drank a cup of ginseng tea with trembling hands and asked, "How many soldiers do you need?" 800,000 soldiers. The old lady counted with her fingers and slowly bent her back. She sighed, "That is to say, you'll leave in half a month." Yu Pinyan nodded in silence. The hall quieted down. After a long time, the old lady held his hand tightly and cried, "You must come back safely. Xiang'er's leg is about to recover. You must come back and see her stand up with your own eyes. You must come back." Yu Pinyan's voice was dry. "Old ancestor, don't worry. Grandson will definitely come back. I won't leave you alone." The grandmother and grandson sat opposite each other holding hands in silence. After about half an hour, the old lady said tiredly, "Go and see your sister. She's praying for you in the temple. She has been kneeling for a whole day. No matter how you persuade her, she won't listen." Yu Pinyan suppressed his anxiety and replied, "Grandson will help you back to your room and then go to see her. When grandson is not here, you must take care of your body. Don't let grandson worry about you thousands of miles away." The old lady nodded and finally showed a smile. Yu Pinyan waited until the old lady fell asleep before he walked quickly to the temple. From afar, he saw Tao Hong and Lulu pacing back and forth in front of the door uneasily. When the two heard the footsteps, they turned around and saw that it was the Marquis. Their faces lit up and they hurriedly went up to report, "Marquis, you're finally back. Miss has been kneeling inside for a day. Her leg just got a little better, so she can't kneel for a long time." Before he finished speaking, Yu Pinyan had already passed by like a gust of wind, leaving only the tightly closed door and two guards with swords guarding the door. Several rows of candles were lit in the temple, and there was a faint smell of Buddhist incense floating in the air. The bodhisattva on the niche looked at the believer kneeling at her feet with her eyes half closed. Her back was very thin, which made her look even more fragile in the flickering candlelight. Mysterious scriptures kept spilling out of her mouth, and her mellow voice was filled with the most pious prayer. When she heard the footsteps, she didn't turn around. She only paused in her recitation for a moment. Yu Pinyan strode over and knelt behind her. He stretched out his arms in front of her and wrapped her in his embrace. His big hands covered her clasped hands. He sighed faintly. "Don't kneel. Be careful not to hurt your legs." Yu Xiang turned a deaf ear and continued to chant scriptures. Yu Pinyan pried her hands apart, took out the copper coin between her palms, and threw it on the futon beside him. Then, he carried her to his knees and said in a hoarse voice, "In half a month, I'll be going to war. Tonight, I'll come back to pack my things and move to the Agile Cavalry Battalion. I won't be able to come back to say goodbye to you until the day before the war. Don't kneel, and don't chant scriptures. If you hurt your leg, I'll be restless when I go to war. On the battlefield, life and death can be decided in an instant. If I'm distracted, maybe." Yu Xiang's numb face finally showed an angry expression. She quickly covered his mouth with her small hand and scolded, "Don't talk about life and death in front of Buddha. I won't kneel or chant scriptures. You can go if you want. Do you think I care?" In fact, she cared about him very much. She finally understood why some people loved him so much that they wanted to tie him up and hide him. She now had the impulse to tie Yu Pinyan up and lock him up. She had thought that they still had a long time together, but she suddenly realized what it meant to change things. Yesterday, they were still sweetly snuggling with each other, but today, they were going to the smoke-filled battlefield. She didn't dare to imagine how many disasters he would face, let alone how she would live after leaving him. She seemed to have forgotten how to breathe, and only endless fear remained in her senses. But she would never show a trace of fear in front of him. She hoped that he would set out fearlessly and come back safely. She wanted to say a few gentle words to make him feel at ease, but when the words came to her mouth, they all changed. Yu Pinyan laughed in a deep voice, "You don't care about me, but I care about you, okay? After I leave, you must take medicine on time and exercise on time. But you can't practice for too long, or you'll hurt your palms again. On the day I return in triumph, you must stand on the high city gate to welcome me." Yu Xiang covered her mouth and sneered, "You're so confident that I'll wait for you? Once you leave, I don't know when you'll come back." If it's short, it'll be a year, and if it's long, it'll be 3 to 5 years. How old will I be by then? She struggled out of her brother's arms and wanted to stand up and walk gracefully, but because she had knelt for too long, her knees were numb. She tried several times but failed, so she could only sit on another praying mat. Her slender legs were crossed, one hand on the ground, and the other hand was lazily placed on her knee. She sat in an extremely seductive posture. Look at me, she raised her hand and fiddled with her cloud-like hair, looking proud. My appearance is not only enough to cause the downfall of a city, but also enough to outshine all the other beauties. My figure is delicate and fit, a little more would make me fat, a little less would make me thin, not too much, not too little, just right. Her fingertips slid down her cheeks and neck to her shoulders, and then she lifted her overcoat to reveal half of her snow-white, round shoulders. She continued, originally, breaking my legs was a big regret, but now that my legs have healed, sooner or later I'll be able to walk again. Tell me, who wouldn't want to marry such a wonderful person like me? Why do you think I'll wait for you? If you don't come back in 2 years, then I'm sorry, but I'll have to give up holding the pipa. After saying this, she narrowed her eyes and peeked at her brother's expression. How could Pinyin not know that she didn't mean what she said, but he was still stabbed in the heart by her words, don't hold the pipa. He suddenly bullied her and bit her annoying red lips with a gloomy face. The two of them quickly tangled together. A gust of wind blew, and the flickering candlelight flickered, projecting their inseparable figures on the snow-white wall. After an intense kiss, Wuxia felt that her numb knees had recovered. She pushed away her brother who was on top of her and sat on his abdomen. She picked up the copper coins on the praying mat and stuffed them into his inner pocket. Word by word, she warned him, you must come back alive, or else I won't wait for you. The dim candlelight illuminated her tear-filled eyes, and the fear and sadness contained in them made Pinyin unable to breathe. He pressed his sister into his arms. After a long time, he hoarsely replied, okay, I'll definitely come back safely. After a pause, he continued, if there's something difficult to solve, you can go find Shen Yuanqi. He'll take care of you. Wuxia didn't answer. She only rubbed her cheek against his warm chest. The two of them quietly hugged each other for a moment. When they heard the sound of gongs and drums, they opened the door and came out. Pinyin bent down to pick up his sister, but she refused. Save your strength. I'm afraid you won't be able to sleep tonight. After saying this, she sat in the wheelchair and ordered Tao Hong and Lu Lu to push her. Pinyin had no choice but to walk side by side with her. Seeing that they were about to arrive at Jingfu courtyard, Wuxia suddenly grabbed his hand. She raised her head and whispered, brother, I'm actually lying to you. I'll always wait for you, always wait for you. If you don't come back, I'll die here. You said it before. I was born for family you, and I'll die for family you. I'm not going anywhere. Her eyes were filled with sparkling tears, but she stubbornly raised her head and refused to let them fall. Her pitch-black pupils were filled with love and determination. At this moment, the moon hanging in the sky dimmed. The surrounding breeze froze. The sounds of frogs and insects in the grass came to an abrupt end. All of a sudden, there was only the girl in front of him who was so beautiful that it made his heart relax. Once again, he deeply realized that, she was an existence that he could never let down. He opened his mouth, wanting to give a response, but found that his throat was so tight that he couldn't utter a single word. He could only lean over, press her against the back of the chair, and crazily kiss her. He held her cheeks with both hands, not allowing her red lips to retreat for even a moment. Tao Hong and Lu Lu hurriedly covered their mouths to stop the exclamations that were about to overflow from their throats. Then, they turned around and looked around, afraid that they would be seen by others. Fortunately, it was already 3 o'clock in the morning. Everyone had already fallen asleep, and there were only quietly standing trees in the garden. The two of them were reluctant to part. After a long time, they finally stopped gasping for breath. Yu Pinyin held his little sister's small face and carefully pecked her forehead, the tip of her nose, and the side of her cheeks. Then, he picked her up and strode back. Tao Hong and Lu Lu hurriedly pushed their wheelchairs to follow. After the group of people walked away, a small and thin figure came out of the artificial cave. The moonlight shone on her pale face. It was Yu Miaoqi's head maid, Bao Sheng. Miss, quickly open the door, miss. She hurriedly knocked on the door. Why are you so noisy in the middle of the night? The maid on night watch opened the door and covered Yu Miaoqi with a smock. What do you want? Yu Miaoqi supported her forehead with her hand, her face full of impatience. Bao Sheng glanced at the maid. Yu Miaoqi understood and sent her away. Then, she urged, if you have something to say, quickly say it. Don't you know what time it is? Miss, this servant was very hungry in the middle of the night and wanted to go to the kitchen to get something to eat. She took out a cold and hard steamed bun from her bosom to prove that she was telling the truth. Then, she continued, but I didn't expect to meet Master Ho and Miss 3 on the way. Do you know what they were doing? What were they doing? Yu Miaoqi's impatient expression instantly disappeared. She leaned forward slightly and stared at Bao Sheng's open and closed mouth. They were actually doing that. Bao Sheng pointed at her own lips, her face red with embarrassment. What? Yu Miaoqi's nerves were tense. She had a vague guess. They were kissing. Bao Sheng finished speaking in one breath. Then, she lowered her head and covered her face. That scene was really hot. Just thinking about it made her feel embarrassed and indescribable. Yu Miaoqi was stunned. After a long time, she clapped her hands and laughed. She was so excited that her voice was trembling. Good. I was wondering why Yu Pinyin would spoil a bastard so much. It turns out that they already had an affair. Good, this is really good. This time, I will definitely consign that bastard to eternal damnation. Chapter 114. Yu Pinyin had been organizing military affairs in the Agile Cavalry Battalion and collecting provisions. Half a month later, when he was about to leave, he returned home and said goodbye to his family. The old lady prepared a table of good wine and dishes for him to see him off. The delicious dishes were mouth-watering, and the wine in the cup was fragrant. However, there was no sound of toasting or laughter in the living room. The old lady resisted the urge to sigh and forced a smile. Everyone, eat. Why are you still in a daze? Come, have a drink with your big brother. I wish him a safe journey and a triumphant return. Yu Miaoqi was the first to agree. She raised her wine cup and waved it at Yu Pinyin. She smiled and said, Big brother, here's a toast to you. I hope you'll shock the barbarians and return victorious. She took a small sip. Yu Pinyin gave her face and drank the wine in the cup in one gulp. Next was Yu Siyu. She said nothing more than auspicious things like returning to the court victoriously. Everyone looked around and found that Yu Xiang had been playing with the wine cup with her head down and didn't say anything. Xianger, have a drink with your brother. The person he misses the most is you. The old lady reached out to stroke her hair. Yu Xiang seemed to wake up from a dream. She raised the wine cup and said briefly, Come back alive. Then she drank it in one gulp. Before Yu Pinyin could respond, she immediately filled her own cup and drank it. After drinking 4 or 5 cups, she wiped her mouth with a handkerchief. She opened her mouth slightly and let out a very delicate burp. Her cheeks slowly turned red. At this time, the old lady finally realized that her granddaughter was very unhappy and wanted to get herself drunk. She wanted to stop her but found that everything she said was empty words. Instead, she imitated her granddaughter and drank several cups of wine. Finally, she let out a long sigh. It's not good to drink on an empty stomach. Eat more food. Yu Pinyin put away the wine cups and gently advised. Yu Xiang didn't have a wine cup, so she directly picked up the wine pot and poured it into her mouth. When Yu Pinyin tried to grab it, the wine pot was already half empty. Her face was red and her eyes were hazy. She held her cheek with one hand and put food in Yu Pinyin's bowl with the other. She smiled foolishly. Brother, eat it while it's hot. When we get to Shijiang, we can only eat dry food. This steamed sea bass is your favorite, so is this braised meatball, and this chestnut stewed pig tail. Although she was very drunk, she could count her brother's preferences with her eyes closed. She only stopped when her brother's bowl was full and almost overflowed. She looked up at the sky and pretended to think. Let me think what else brother likes to eat. Your favorite food isn't on the table. Based on his male instincts, he rubbed against her body. At the same time, he used his lips to worship every part of her body. Yu Xiang bowed, raised her head, squinted her eyes. Her slightly opened red lips spat out a painful and joyful moan. Seeing that her brother was dressed neatly, she muttered unfair and tore off his outer robe. Her little hand reached into his clothes and stroked his neatly arranged 8-pack abs. Then, she moved down and grabbed. Yu Pinyin gasped. He almost passed out from the little seductress's hand. Sure enough, he would die in the hands of this little seductress sooner or later. He sweated profusely. The noises coming from the room were weirder than ever before. Tao Hong and Liu Lu looked at each other, their eyes filled with the words, should we stop it or not? After the brother and sister left, Yu Siyu also got up to leave. Yu Miaoqi whispered into the old lady's ear, Grandmother, let me tell you a piece of bad news. Your most beloved grandson and granddaughter might already have an affair. Who knows what they're doing right now? Do you want to go and take a look? The old lady stared at her with a cold gaze. After a long while, she suddenly got up and walked quickly to Jingfu courtyard. Yu Miaoqi sneered silently and quickly followed. Halfway there, the two of them didn't notice a colorful parrot flying over their heads. Tao Hong and Lu Lu were in a dilemma. They saw Ah Lu, who had gone out to get some fresh air, flutter her wings and land on the golden frame in the corridor. She shouted at the top of her lungs, the old ancestor is here. The old ancestor is here. Oh no, the old lady is here. Tao Hong quickly knocked on the door. Lu Lu took out a walnut and stuffed it in Ah Lu's mouth. Ah Lu liked to eat alone. She held the walnut in her mouth and flew away. In the room, Yu Pinyin had already heard the noise. He quickly helped each other get dressed and tucked his sister into bed. He didn't do this to avoid responsibility, but to protect his sister. Even if they wanted to publicize their relationship, they couldn't do it in such an embarrassing situation. A moment later, the old lady led Yu Miaoqi into the courtyard, followed by Mama Ma, Wan Qiu, and the others who didn't know what was going on. The old lady was so anxious that she even forgot to send the servants away. She walked to the unlatched door and suddenly came back to her senses. She waved her hand and said, "You can all go back. Don't follow me." Mama Ma and the others immediately left. The old lady reached out to push the door, but her fingertips stopped the moment before they touched the door. She was a little timid. She didn't know how to deal with such a scene. Yu Miaoqi was one step ahead of her and opened the door. Then, she frowned. Yu Pinyin was neatly dressed and sitting by the bed with a gentle expression on his face. Yu Xiang was lying in bed with her eyes closed and her cheeks flushed. She was sleeping very soundly. There was an empty bowl on the bedside table. It must have been filled with hangover soup. This scene was very normal and very heartwarming. It was just an older brother taking care of his drunk sister. Yu Miaoqi was stunned for a moment before he felt deeply disappointed. He looked at the old lady with a guilty conscience. The old lady stepped forward and whispered, "Is Xiang, okay?" "I was worried that her leg injury would be affected by drinking too much, so I came to take a look. She's fine. She fell asleep after singing for a while." Yu Pinyin smiled and shook his head. Yu Xiang loved to sing when she was drunk. She could sing from Peking opera to Kunku opera, then from Kunku opera to Huangmei ballads. She twisted her waist and danced with her small hands. The old lady couldn't help laughing and said, "Then let's all go out and let her have a good sleep. Why don't you wait for Xiang, to wake up before you leave? If she doesn't see you when she opens her eyes, I'm afraid she'll make a fuss." "No, I'm leaving now. She's grown up and sensible. She won't make a fuss." Yu Pinyin bent down and squeezed his sister's small hand that was resting on the pillow. "I hope so." The old lady sighed silently. Yu Miaoqi took the opportunity to lift Yu Xiang's blanket while the two of them were talking. She only gave up when she saw that she was neatly dressed in the same clothes that she had worn for dinner. Yu Pinyin glanced at her coldly, but the old lady didn't even want to look at her. She turned around and left. Knowing that her brother was about to leave, Yu Xiang wanted to throw herself around his neck and ask him to take her to Shijiang. She also wanted to beg him to come back safely. However, she had no choice but to lie straight on the bed because she was acting. After a long time, Lu pushed the door open and entered. He said softly, "Miss, Master Ho has already left. He asked you to take good care of yourself." Yu Xiang turned over and sat up. She hugged the blanket and wept silently. Lu fetched a basin of water to help her wipe her face. He stammered, "Miss, did you and Master Ho succeed just now?" "Almost." Yu Xiang blew her nose with a handkerchief. Her tone was very depressed. Lu, on the other hand, seemed to be relieved of a heavy burden, and the corners of her mouth curled up into a smile. It was good that they didn't succeed. Miss losing her chastity was a small matter. In any case, she wouldn't marry anyone other than Master Ho. However, if she accidentally got pregnant, Master Ho was so far away that he wouldn't be able to take care of her and her son. Yu Xiang was blinded by Lu's smile. She said angrily, "You heartless thing. Your son-in-law is on the battlefield and you're still smiling so happily. Get lost." Chapter 115. After the matriarch sent her grandson away, she sat in the hall in a daze. Yu Miaoqi's words kept replaying in her mind, and she couldn't let it go. "You said the two of them." She rubbed her temples and looked at Mama Ma, who was standing to the side. Without waiting for Mama Ma to answer, someone reported from outside, "The old lady, second miss is here. Let her in." Yu Miaoqi walked in slowly, followed by a pale-faced Bao Sheng. After paying her respects, she waved at Bao Sheng, "Come here and tell grandmother what you saw." Bao Sheng knelt down and told her grandmother everything she saw that night in a trembling voice. Then, she buried her head and trembled. "Good girl, it's so late and you're still walking around in the fu." The matriarch's calm expression suddenly turned cold as she ordered, "Take her away and force her to be mute. Sell her in a few days." When she said this, she repeatedly recalled the scene of her grandson and granddaughter interacting with each other. Only then did she realize that the two's intimacy had long surpassed that of a normal sibling relationship. How could a 15-year-old girl let her brother carry her around every day? How could a brother stay by her side all night when his sister was sick? This attentiveness and concern clearly showed that he cared for his beloved. Bao Sheng looked up in horror and screamed, "Miss, I beg you to save this servant. Didn't you promise that nothing would happen to this servant? You can't go back on your word." What are you screaming for? Stuff her mouth and drag her away. The matriarch smashed the teacup in her hand and turned to look at Yu Miaoqi. She warned her word by word, you should also watch your mouth. Yu Miaoqi didn't answer and instead asked, Grandmother, how do you plan to deal with Yu Xiang? She'll be drowned in a pond for committing adultery. It's not up to you to decide how to deal with her. Don't tell me you want to help her get away with it. If that's the case, granddaughter can't agree. If I'm unhappy and spread this matter, your precious grandsons will be ruined. Yu Miaoqi covered her mouth and chuckled. There's no evidence. Go ahead and say it. The matriarch closed her eyes and snorted. What proof do you need for this kind of thing? It's enough as long as others believe it. Yu Miaoqi calmly admired the nail polish she had just applied. What are you going to do? Old Madame Fu wanted to force Yu Miaoqi out of the house as well. Although she was disappointed in her two grandsons, she had been distressed for more than 20 years. How could her feelings be so easily erased? Nothing, I'm not a vicious person. Why don't you hurry up and find a husband for Yu Xiang? By the time De Gu came back and found out that what was done could not be undone, he had no choice but to give up. What do you think? The old lady's heart trembled. She waved her hand and said, I'll think about it. You can go back. You should know that no egg can remain intact and the nest is overturned. Now that something has happened to Yandere and Xiang'er, you won't be any better off. I know. Yu Miaoqi chuckled and left. A few days later, the family that had originally arranged a marriage for Yu Miaoqi sent a servant to deliver a letter, saying that their master had suddenly fallen ill. Now, she couldn't even walk, and her future was uncertain. The marriage would be delayed. If she could recover, then they would get married. If she couldn't, then they would send someone to cancel the marriage. The Marquis family was extremely powerful, so they didn't dare to make any requests. When Yu Miaoqi heard the news, she breathed a sigh of relief. She secretly thought that that person was really resourceful. Old Madame Fu only thought that this person was cursed by a loner. After sighing for a while, she began to arrange the marriage between Yu Xiu and Yu Xiang. That's right, after much consideration, she decided to marry off her granddaughter before her grandson came back. Just as she was asking people to look around, her mother's sister-in-law suddenly sent a letter, saying that she had found a good man for Xiang'er. This person was an old friend of her mother's family. He was also from a scholarly family. He had just turned 17 this year, and was the eldest son of the first wife. He had 2 younger brothers and 2 younger sisters, but they were all sons and daughters of concubines. They couldn't be compared to him. His father held a position in the Ministry of Works. His position wasn't high, but he had made great contributions to the flood control project. He was someone who valued learning over fame and fortune. Under his father's influence, he was also infatuated with learning. When he was 8 years old, he became famous. When he was 12 years old, he was able to become a scholar. If his father hadn't said that he was still young and needed a few more years of experience, Shen Yuanqi probably wouldn't have been able to become the top scholar last year. Not only was this person talented, he was also handsome and didn't look like an ordinary person. His noble character was praised by everyone. In a few years, he would definitely overshadow the current Junjie like Yu Pinyin and Shen Yuanqi. How could such a good person like Xiang'er? It wasn't that the matriarch belittled herself, but her granddaughter was spoiled by her grandson. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to stand her naughty personality. After several letters, the matriarch found out that this person had seen Yu Xiang at the Baiyun Taoist temple last year. He was amazed by her and couldn't forget her. He wanted to marry her as his wife. Although his father didn't care about fame and fortune, his mother was good at scheming. She wanted to climb up the ranks of the Marquis household. When she heard that Master Ku Hui had cured Yu Xiang's broken leg and that she would be no different from ordinary people in the future, she had this idea. The matriarch thought about it several times and finally agreed. She was afraid that her granddaughter would resist, so she kept it a secret. On this day, Shen Yuanqi had just arrived at the yamen when he saw one of Yu Pinyan's Chongsui waiting by the door. He led the person into the room and asked in a low voice, "What orders does your Master Ho have?" Master Ho asks the Lord Shen to recognize Miss 3 immediately. The Chongsui bowed and replied. Yu Pinyan was far away on the western expedition, so he naturally couldn't send a letter back. However, before he left, he said that if the matriarch wanted to arrange a marriage for Miss 3, then let the Lord Shen recognize Miss 3 as soon as possible. Yu Pinyan's eyes and ears were everywhere in the Marquis household. How could the matriarch's private actions be hidden from him? Even if he wasn't there, he still left a lot of ways for his sister. Shen Yuanqi hurriedly stood up and knocked over the chair behind him. He said incoherently, "He's finally willing." "Why is he willing?" "No, I'll go change my clothes." "Wait a moment." After changing out of his official's robe, he finally calmed down. He frowned and asked, "Why did your Master Ho agree to let me recognize Xiang'er? But what's going on in the Marquis household?" Reporting to the Lord Shen, the old lady wants to marry Miss 3 off. Marry who? Shen Yuanqi felt very uncomfortable that his sister's marriage was being manipulated by the family Yu. Marry the Lord Sun's eldest son, Sun Mingjie, the assistant minister of works. Although Sun Mingjie was young, he had a reputation for being talented. Moreover, he was handsome and had a noble character. In a few years, he would be a romantic figure. Shen Yuanqi didn't expect the family Yu to be able to find such a good husband for his sister. He immediately looked at the Chongsui with a puzzled gaze. At this juncture, he was asked to recognize his sister. His sister's marriage was bound to change. Although he was now promoted to a fourth-rank official of the Supreme Court, if he used his connections to find another marriage for his sister, he wouldn't be able to find a better candidate than Sun Mingjie. Even if the old lady took his place, he had to admit that this was a good marriage. The old lady really loved his sister as her own granddaughter. Chongsui didn't answer. He took out a red and white brocade from his sleeve. Shen Yuanqi unfolded the brocade and saw that it was a letter written in blood. Because of the passage of time, the color of the blood had turned brown. It also had a fishy smell. The words written between the lines were frightening. This was a letter written by a woman before her death. She said that she used to be Sun Mingjie's personal maidservant. Because she couldn't stand his various insults and abuses, she committed suicide. She hoped that her family would take this letter to the yamen to redress her grievances. After Shen Yuanqi finished reading, his fingertips trembled. He asked in a deep voice, "Where did you find this?" The torture described in the brocade was simply appalling. Even the dragon scale guard would have to admit defeat if they saw it. He really couldn't imagine that Sun Mingjie hid such a ferocious face under his gentle appearance. The so-called beast in human clothing was nothing more than this. If Xiang married him, he didn't know what kind of torture she would suffer. Master Ho has his own connections. Lord Shen, you don't need to be suspicious. Madam Sun has already suppressed this case. Even the Lord Sun hasn't heard of it. The outside world has no way of knowing. It was really lucky to find this letter. This matter concerns Miss 3's life. Lord Shen, please help. On behalf of Master Ho, this servant thanks the Lord Shen for his help. Chongsui bowed deeply with an anxious expression. Shen Yuanqi quickly helped him up and said, Xiang is my only family. Saving her is saving me. I should be thanking your Master Ho. Let's go. I'll go pick up Xiang and bring her back. The two hurried to the Marquis household. In order to avoid arousing suspicion, Chongsui went back through the back door. Shen Yuanqi was led to the main hall by a servant. Shen greets old madam. I haven't seen old madam for a few days. Is old madam still well? Everything is well. Lord Shen, please sit down. May I know why you've come? For the matter of Xiang, or returning to her ancestral home. At this point, the fake smile on old madam's face finally disappeared. She put down the teacup with a clang and said in a deep voice, Lord Shen, are you confused? What does my family's Xiang have to do with you? Shen isn't confused. The confused one is old madam. If old madam didn't insist on marrying Xiang to such a person, Shen wouldn't have rashly come to disturb Xiang's peace. Shen Yuanqi said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. Marrying such a person? Lord Shen, tell me, what kind of person is Sun Mingjie? Which part of him isn't worthy of Xiang? I know that as Xiang's older brother, you won't be comfortable if you can't ask about Xiang's marriage. However, my love for Xiang isn't any less than yours. The husband I'm looking for her is naturally the best. Old madam's words were sonorous. Marrying Sun Mingjie? When did I want to marry Sun Mingjie? Yu Xiang, who had rushed over after hearing the news, asked loudly. The faces of everyone in the hall changed. Old madam hurriedly sent all the servants away, leaving only Mama Ma to serve her. While she was still considering how to appease her granddaughter, Yu Xiang sneered again. I was wondering why old madam's gaze on me has become stranger and stranger recently. You've also become more and more silent when facing me. It turns out that you already knew about my brother and me. She waved her hand and ordered Tao Hong and Lu Lu to push her into the hall. She slowly said, since old madam already knows, I'll tell you frankly here, I won't marry anyone except for my brother. That's Sun Mingjie, please help me get back as soon as possible. You shut up. Old madam angrily slammed the table, shaking all the tea sets to the ground and smashing them into pieces. Shen Yuanqi, on the other hand, was completely stunned. He kept thinking about the words I won't marry anyone but my brother. Then, he felt as if a bolt of lightning had struck him from the top of his head, waking him up. No wonder Yu Pinyin said that when he reached marriageable age, he would recognize his sister. No wonder he was so anxious about his sister's marriage. It turned out that he had this idea. Chapter 116. Old madam smashed the tea set in exchange for a moment of silence in the hall. Then she said in a low voice, let's talk in private. There are outsiders here. If she didn't make it clear today, she wouldn't be able to do so after Shen Yuanqi left. Old madam would definitely force her to marry someone else. Her legs were inconvenient, and she was a junior. She wouldn't even be able to resist. Yu Xiang's mind raced. She already understood that she had no choice but to leave with Shen Yuanqi today. Outsiders? She looked around and asked, how can there be outsiders here? Seeing old madam glancing at Shen Yuanqi, she said firmly, he's not an outsider. He's my brother. Shen Yuanqi's anger instantly dissipated because of this sentence. Old madam exploded. She asked sternly, what do you mean? Are you planning to leave with him? Great, I worked so hard to raise you, and you want to leave just like that? You really have no conscience. As she spoke, tears flowed down her face. Yu Xiang also had tears in her eyes. She replied, I don't want to leave either. You're forcing me. How do I have no conscience? You raised me, and I want to be your granddaughter-in-law. Isn't that very conscientious? Can't you just treat it as raising a child bride for your family? I'll be filial to you in the future, no different from now. What's so bad about me that you have to marry me off? I'm good at housekeeping. I'm beautiful. I have a graceful figure. Although I'm a bit naughty, I never look for trouble. I can be considered as supporting the family. Oh, are you disdaining me because I can't walk? She propped herself up from the wheelchair and walked steadily in front of old madam. She said, "Look, I can walk now. I can walk more than 50 meters in one breath. In the future, I can walk 100 meters. After that, I'll be like a normal person. What's not good about me? I'll change." For her brother, she was ready to risk everything. Old madam roared, "You're good in every way except for one thing. You and Yandere are siblings. You two being together is incest. I will never agree. If my brother and I are siblings, then who is Shen Yuanqi?" Wuxia walked a few steps to Shen Yuanqi's side, grabbed one of his arms and asked rhetorically. "I don't care. In short, in my heart, you two are brother and sister. This will never change." The old lady fell onto the soft couch, looking exhausted. Family, you people were all stubborn. Once they had decided on something, they would never change it. Wuxia's straight back suddenly collapsed, but she desperately blinked her eyes to prevent her tears from falling. At this moment, she missed her elder brother who was far away in Shijiang. She missed his gentle and deep voice, she missed his arms that always gave her a sense of security, she missed his lingering kisses. In Shen's heart, Xiang'er is my younger sister. This will never change. Old madam arbitrarily arranged a marriage for my younger sister, but she doesn't know what position I am in. Shen came today to take my younger sister home. Let's cancel the marriage. Shen Yuanqi, who had been silent all this time, slowly opened his mouth. Lord Shen, it wasn't easy for me to arrange a good man like Sun Mingjie for Xiang'er. In my heart, I'm really planning for her. If you ruin this marriage, I don't know if there will be a better candidate in the future. Old madam tried her best to persuade him. Shen Yuanqi took out the blood letter from his sleeve pocket and put it on. While old madam was reading it, he waved to Wuxia, "Go and pack your things. Today, you will leave with big brother." Wuxia looked at the blood letter with a puzzled expression. "I'll tell you about this matter in detail when we go back. Go quickly." Shen Yuanqi gave her a comforting smile. Wuxia sat back in the wheelchair and was pushed out by Tao Hong and Lu Lu. After old madam finished reading the blood letter, her mind was in a mess. As long as she thought about how she almost handed over Xiang'er to such an evil spirit, she felt a chill run through her meridians and body. If Yandere came back from the border and found clues, wouldn't he go to Sun Mingjie's family and chop them all up? Then this matter would certainly be big. With her grandson's temper, the probability of this happening was 100%. Old madam threw the blood letter far away. In the blink of an eye, her head was full of cold sweat. When she came back to her senses, she found that her granddaughter had already gone back to pack her things. She hurriedly used her walking stick to stop her. Grandmother and granddaughter pulled each other back and forth, causing Jingfu courtyard to be in an uproar. The servants all ran to watch the show. Even the patrolling guards heard the commotion and rushed over. In the chaos, no one noticed that Yu Miaoqi secretly opened the side door and went into Yu Pinyan's study next door. She didn't have any loyal servants by her side. Although this kind of thing had hidden risks, she had to do it herself. When Yu Miaoqi came back wiping her cold sweat, Wuxia had already left. He only took a few pieces of clothes and 2 maidservants with him. The rest of the things were left untouched. She didn't know if it was because of anger or guilt. Old madam ordered the guards to seal off the entire courtyard. She said that no one was allowed to enter or leave until Master Ho came back. Yu Miaoqi secretly said that it was a close call. She originally wanted to take advantage of Wuxia's wedding to put that thing in. However, Shen Yuanqi's arrival destroyed her original plan, but also gave her a new opportunity. She knew that if this matter was caused, family Yu would face the danger of 9 generations being executed. However, when Master Ho was alive, old madam, you had saved the emperor and was granted a death exemption token by the late emperor. This was very similar to the family Shen people. You dare to accept what you do. Well said. I won't interfere with the matter between you and Yu Pinyin. Everything can be discussed when he comes back. What do you think? Seeing that the vigilance in his sister's eyes had not yet subsided, he continued, I promise you that before Yu Pinyin comes back, I won't help you find a husband. After all, you're a girl, and your legs are inconvenient. It's not safe for you to live alone in the field. Moreover, if you want to marry Yu Pinyin, you have to have a decent identity, right? When we go back, I'll have the clan elders change the family tree and let you be the daughter of the family Shen. From now on, you'll be called Shen Xiang, okay? After being called Yu Xiang for 2 lifetimes, suddenly having to change her name to Shen Xiang naturally made her feel uncomfortable. Yu Xiang was about to shake her head, but then she remembered that after marrying her brother, she would have to take on her husband's surname. She could also change her name back, so she nodded slightly. Shen Yuanqi was in a good mood. Ignoring his sister's small head that was trying to avoid him, he pulled her over and rubbed her head. He smiled and said, we brother and sister are finally reunited. If father and mother knew about this in the underworld, they would also be happy. After saying this, he was silent for a moment, and his eyes revealed a hint of grief. Yu Xiang waited for him to regain his senses before slowly opening her mouth. Although I already knew that you were my biological brother, to tell you the truth, you and I have never spent even a day together. Naturally, our feelings can't compare to brother Yu's. But since we have already recognized each other and are the only family in the world, I will try my best to accept you. Us brother and sister will help each other and support the family Shen together, so that we won't let down father and mother who passed away. Shen Yuanqi, my big brother, from now on, please take care of me. She took the initiative to reach out her hand and shook Shen Yuanqi's large hand. These words were said very calmly and honestly, causing Shen Yuanqi's heart to move greatly. He suddenly realized that there was a huge gap between his biological sister and Yu Miaoqi. If it was Yu Miaoqi today, he was afraid that she would be dissatisfied with the sudden lowering of her status, but she would use affectionate behavior to cover up this dissatisfaction. She was completely unlike Yu Xiang, who said what was in her heart without any pretense. Who wouldn't like such a true and frank sister? Shen Yuanqi held his sister's small hand and smiled happily. Because Master Xue had given Shen Yuanqi a new lease on life, although Shen Yuanqi bought a house, he still lived with the Xue family. When the two arrived, the Xue family was eating. When they saw Yu Xiang sitting in a wheelchair, they looked as if they had seen a ghost. Yu Xiang's mischievous and unreasonable reputation was known by everyone in the capital. Master Xue and young Master Xue only touched wine glasses and spilled wine, but the Xue family's womenfolk looked as if a great disaster was about to befall them. Especially the two Miss Xue, they hugged each other and trembled. Chapter 117. In the end, Lord Xue had experienced great storms, so he quickly regained his composure and stepped forward to ask. Zichang, Shen Yuanqi's courtesy name, why did you bring Miss 3U back? Shen Yuanqi stepped forward and replied, adoptive father, Xiang is my younger sister, so she should naturally come back with me. There was a flurry of banging sounds as someone dropped their rice bowl and chopsticks. Your younger sister. What is the meaning of this? Xiang is my long-lost younger sister. It's a long story. Shen Yuanqi pushed his younger sister into the hall. After sitting down, he briefly recounted the events of the past, leaving the Xue family members dumbfounded. After explaining the cause and effect, Shen Yuanqi continued, this time, I brought Xiang back because I planned to have her acknowledge her ancestors. What does adoptive father think? Lord Shui only recognized Shen Yuanqi as his adoptive son and didn't want him to change his surname. At this time, he naturally couldn't intervene in his family affairs and could only nod in agreement. While the two were talking, Yuxiang was also imperceptibly sizing up the people in the hall. Although Madame Shui concealed it extremely well, the depths of her eyes occasionally flashed with loathing and worry. She was probably on guard against Shen Yuanqi. This was no wonder. Young Master Shui was disappointing. Today, the Shui family was completely supported by Shen Yuanqi alone. After a long time, it was hard to guarantee that he wouldn't become greedy for the Shui family's vast family business. Young Master Shui was open-minded by nature, his eyes smiling. He really did treat Shen Yuanqi as a brother of different surnames. The other concubine-born children had been taught by Madame Shui to be submissive. They usually ate in their own small courtyard and didn't show their faces at this time. Madame Shui gave birth to 2 daughters. One was 12 years old and the other was the same age as Yuxiang. Their heads were lowered and their expressions couldn't be seen, but from their tightly clasped hands, one could see that they were uneasy about having a stranger in their home. He probably couldn't stay in the Shui family for long. After a long time, it was hard to guarantee that he wouldn't become dirty. Yuxiang inwardly pondered. Shen Yuanqi and Lord Shui discussed the matter of returning to their ancestral home. Only then did Madame Shui open her mouth to let the siblings sit down and eat. No one spoke in the hall, only the sound of chopsticks hitting the plates could be heard. Yuxiang tasted as if she was chewing on wax. She missed the time when her brother was still around. When they were eating at the same table, she could secretly poke her brother's thigh with the tip of her finger and make him change his expression. She could slightly pout and ask him for a kiss. Even if she accidentally ate the hottest chili because she was absent-minded, she could still taste the sweetness on the tip of her tongue. Her brother had left, but it was as if he had taken away all the happiness in her life. Yuxiang couldn't help but tear up as she ate. Shen Yuanqi secretly sighed in his heart, as he put down the bowl and chopsticks and said, "We're done eating. Xiang'er is new here, so I'll show her around the mansion. Godfather, godmother, please enjoy your meal. Let Jai and Jian bring Miss Shen there. They're easy to talk to. You stay. Acknowledging your ancestors is a big matter. I need to discuss it with you. After all, Lingnan is a high mountain and the road is long. You also have an official position and can't leave. We need to find someone reliable to do it." Lord Shui smiled. Shen Yuanqi looked at his sister. Seeing her wave her hand indifferently, he could only stay. The Shui family was considered a prestigious family in Lingnan. Although they were now declining, their foundation was still there. As the eldest daughter of the Shui family, Shui Jia had a bit of a noble aura. In contrast, the second daughter of the Shui family, Shui Jian, was much inferior. When she saw Yuxiang pick up the horsewhip and play with it, her face turned pale and she found an excuse to leave. Shui Jia also didn't urge her to stay. She led Yuxiang to stroll around the back garden. When they came across a slightly flat road, she took the initiative to push the wheelchair. "Miss Yuxiang is such a famous person, but I didn't expect that one day you would fall to this point. The world is really unpredictable." She suddenly leaned over and whispered in Yuxiang's ear. Finally, she looked back at Yuxiang and smiled brightly. "Have I ever offended you?" Yuxiang asked with a frown. "Never." Shui Jia shook her head. She just couldn't stand Yuxiang. It wasn't that she didn't offend her. She once saw Yuxiang from afar at the spring banquet hosted by the crown princess. She was clearly a cripple with a broken leg, but she laughed more arrogantly than anyone else. She didn't know who mentioned her name, but the volume was a bit louder. When she glanced over with a cold gaze, everyone held their breath. The scene was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. A few days after she came back, she still felt her heart palpitate from that scene. After the palpitations, she felt contempt. What was there to be afraid of? She was just using her power to bully others. Without power and status, she was just a cripple. Her imagination at that time had unexpectedly become reality. Although she had no grievances or enmity with Yu Xiang, Xue Jia felt a burst of pleasure. When this matter spread throughout the capital, there would be more people who would feel happy. How could Yu Xiang not understand these people's mentality of adding insult to injury? She sneered, then, I can't avoid offending Miss Xue today. Xue Jia's heart trembled. She heard her continue, being able to recognize my ancestors and return to the clan is a great thing, but Miss Xue used the word, fallen, in her mouth. It can be seen how lowly my older brother is in Miss Xue's heart, and how miserable it is to return to his side. Although my older brother is now a fourth-rank court official, in Miss Xue's heart, I'm afraid that he is still the Xue family's servant. No, I didn't mean that. Xue Jia hurriedly explained. Then why did you mock me for falling to such a state? What kind of state is this? Can Miss Xue dispel my doubts? Yu Xiang blinked with a confused expression. Xue Jia's cheeks flushed red. She was speechless. Yu Xiang sneered, I won't feel lowly just because I return to my older brother's side, and I won't feel ashamed because of my older brother's past experience as a servant. Miss Xue, it's best if you speak to me in the future. Although I'm not the family you missed three, I'm still the Minister of Agriculture that was conferred by the Emperor. If you really want to talk about rank, your father and mother will have to salute me when they see me. Xue Jia's flushed cheeks instantly turned pale. Just as she was in a dilemma, she heard Shen Yuanqi's gentle voice from not too far away, Xianger, it's time to go back. Xue Jia didn't know how long he had been standing there and how much he had heard. She suddenly felt so ashamed that she wanted to die. She lifted her skirt and hurriedly ran away. Tao Hong and Lu Lu were focused on admiring the flowers. They didn't stand up for their master because they knew that in front of their master, all the noble maidens in the capital were paper tigers. Shen Yuanqi pushed his younger sister back to her room. After sitting down, he poured her a cup of hot tea. His face was expressionless. Yu Xiang took a small sip and frankly said, older brother, although Master Xue treats you well, Madame Xue is still on guard against you. After a long time, it's hard to guarantee that she won't whisper something into Master Xue and young Master Xue's ears. If you don't covet the Xue family business, it's best if we move out as soon as possible to prevent our benefactor from turning into an enemy. Shen Yuanqi raised his brows and asked, then what if I covet the Xue family business? Then I can only say that water has entered your brain and advise you to think twice before you act. What's the point of losing your good reputation for such a small thing? Don't pick up sesame seeds and lose the watermelon. Yu Xiang was as patient as a child who had lost his footing. Indeed, the emperor placed him in an important position because he didn't have any foundation. The second reason was because he knew how to repay kindness and valued friendship. If he took over the Xue family business, his future career would be cut off. Shen Yuanqi was just casually asking, but seeing his younger sister so serious, he couldn't help but laugh. Once again, he became aware of the huge difference between Yu Miaoqi and his younger sister. Yu Miaoqi had always been strong since she was young. She had to take everything she could get her hands on for herself. Otherwise, she would never give up. If he had asked Yu Miaoqi just now, the other party's eyes would probably light up and she would actively come up with a plan for him. Her temperament was also spoiled by her late parents. In the past, they would always whisper in her ear that she was a noble person and that sooner or later, she would get the best of everything in the world. However, it turned out that they were distorting her nature, and in the end, they molded her into the greedy and selfish person she was today. It was the family Shen who had killed Yu Miaoqi by flattering her. After coming to this conclusion, Shen Yuanqi's mood was very subtle. He couldn't tell if it was more hatred or guilt. The brother and sister discussed for a long time. They both felt that living in the Shui family wasn't a long-term plan. The next day, they greeted Master Shui and sent people to clean up the empty residence. Master Shui tried every possible way to persuade them to stay, but Shen Yuanqi was determined. He also had family members by his side, so he could only let them go. However, he still did his best to complete the matter of Yu Xiang returning to the family. In just a few days, the news that Yu Xiang wasn't of family Yu's bloodline and was actually Shen Zhuangyuan's younger sister was known by everyone. In the past, Yu Xiang had offended many people, but there weren't many who came looking for trouble. There were only 4 reasons. First, her older brother was also a favorite of the emperor and couldn't be easily offended. Second, not only did the emperor not take back her title of Minister of Agriculture, he also had the empress bestow gifts to appease her. Third, the 9th princess came to visit every day and didn't leave until dusk. It could be seen that she was very close to her. Fourth, the crown princess sent several carts of gifts to show how much she valued her. Although Yu Xiang left the marquis household, her situation couldn't be said to be down and out. It was just that she missed Yu Pinyin very much in the dead of night. Yu Xiyu came to visit her several times and said that the old lady was too sick to leave the field. Yu Xiang immediately prepared gifts and went to visit, but was stopped at the gate and couldn't enter. She could only leave in a sorry state. She could already walk like a normal person, but she was still in a wheelchair. She didn't know if it was because she was lazy or something else. 3 months passed like this. On this day, Yu Xiang had just laid down when she fell into a strange dream. She was standing by a muddy river with torrential waves. Not far away, she could hear the sounds of weapons clashing and the desperate sounds of killing. She looked up and saw the gray sky. There was moist water vapor entering her nostrils and a sudden rainstorm. She walked forward in the heavy rain. After a few steps, she saw several steeds galloping towards her, followed by many soldiers wielding scimitars. She wiped the raindrops off her face and stood on her tiptoes to look at the face of the person in the lead. She saw that the person had been shot in the back and had fallen from his horse into the long, muddy river. The soldiers following him mournfully shouted, "Commander-in-Chief," and jumped down one after another, doing their best to paddle towards the floating figure. The cavalry on the shore put away their scimitars and pulled back their bowstrings. The arrows were even denser than the raindrops in the sky, making it impossible for people to escape. Yu Xiang suppressed the horror in her heart and rushed to the riverside to look at the familiar figure. Seeing him slowly sinking, she finally woke up from the boundless fear and helplessness. She reached out and touched her forehead. Her forehead was already covered with cold sweat, and her back and chest were torn apart. Yu Xiang gasped for breath and shouted for Tao Hong and Lu Lu. "Miss, what happened to you?" Lu Lu stared at her pale face and asked in shock. Chapter 118. At this time, the moon was already in the middle of the sky. The evening breeze of early summer blew gently through the window, bringing with it a bit of coolness. The croaking of frogs was noisy and chaotic. Yu Xiang took out the medicine box that Dr. Piao had given her. She poured out all the medicine bottles on the unfolded package and rolled it up to take it away. "Miss, it's already past 3 in the morning. The city gate is already closed. Where can you go? Can we talk about this tomorrow?" Lu Lu hurriedly grabbed the package. "Miss, everything is fine. Why do you want to leave? Did you dream that Master Ho was in danger?" Tao Hong asked as he packed up the clothes. Yu Xiang poured herself a cup of hot tea with trembling hands. After drinking it in one gulp, she finally calmed down a bit. She said in a hoarse voice, "I dreamed that brother was hit by a stray arrow and fell into a surging river. He disappeared without a trace. There were also many pursuers on the riverbank shooting arrows at him. Other people's dreams were all illusory, but her master's dreams were real and foreseen. Tao Hong and Lu Lu sucked in a breath of cold air. They finally understood why she wanted to leave the city in the middle of the night. Based on past experience, this should not have happened yet. If she could tell Master Ho earlier, he would be more vigilant. But miss, you can send someone to deliver a letter to Master Ho. Why do you have to go in person? Xinjiang is filled with the flames of war and bandits and barbarians are everywhere. It's not a place where ordinary people can go. Lu Lu dissuaded her in a low voice. I have to deliver the letter, and I have to go. If I don't see brother in person, I won't be at ease. Yu Xiang firmly waved her hand. But young master won't agree. Tao Hong cautiously said. Yu Xiang was silent for a moment. After a while, she replied, I don't need his consent. Tomorrow, I'll say that my feet hurt and go to Zhenghua Temple to seek medical treatment. Then I'll take the opportunity to stay at Zhenghua Temple. All the great monks of the Zhenghua Temple are skilled in martial arts. I, Master Kohai, only need to borrow a few monks to be my bodyguards. Shen Yuanqi would never agree to let her go to Xinjiang. She was a girl, even if she hired guards to accompany her, it was not 100% safe. Unlike the monks of the Zhenghua Temple, they would be safe and sound. The most important thing now was to convince Master Kohai. Yu Xiang made up his mind and lay back on the bed. However, he couldn't fall asleep for the entire night. The next morning, she pretended that her feet hurt and asked Shen Yuanqi to send her up the mountain to seek medical treatment. The disease was deep in her bones, Ku Hui would not be able to find any clues in such a short time. Seeing that she wanted to stay at Zhenghua Temple, he agreed. Shen Yuanqi had official business to attend to, so he couldn't delay. He pulled his sister along and exhorted her before reluctantly going down the mountain. After he left, Yu Xiang immediately went to see Master Kohai. The two of them talked in secret in the meditation room for a long time. Kohai was really no match for Yu Xiang's sharp tongue. He said that as long as she drew the best lot, he would personally take her to Xinjiang. Yu Xiang's heart was beating like a drum. He knelt and prayed in front of the lot pot for almost an hour before it started to spin. Then, he actually drew the lot king again. Kohai's eyes widened to the size of a copper bell. He took the lot king and examined it over and over again. He also picked up the rest of the bamboo sticks and examined them one by one. He was afraid that someone had tampered with the lot pot and replaced 70 to 80% of the thin sticks with the lot king. Who in the world could hit the jackpot 3 times in a row when the odds were 1 in a billion? Yu Xiang was indeed favored by the heavens. Monks do not lie. Kohai had no choice but to pack up and lead a few monks who were highly skilled in martial arts to see her off. Yu Xiang recalled the scene of her older brother's body being hit by an arrow. She tried every possible way to trick Ku Hui into going with her. Kohai had always liked to wander the world. His face and the Zhenghua Temple's monks' robes were the best guides. Yu Xiang and her 2 maidservants disguised themselves as ordinary lay disciples and mixed in with a group of monks, so they didn't stand out. Before she left, she wrote a letter to Shen Yuanqi, explaining the whole story. She also wanted to write a letter to the matriarch, but she had misgivings that she was old and couldn't bear the shock. She had no choice but to give up. 5 days after Yu Xiang left, a young novice monk came to the Shen residence with a letter. After Shen Yuanqi finished reading the letter, he was so angry that his whole body trembled. Only now did he understand the extent of his younger sister's love for Yu Pinyin. If she didn't love him more than her life, how could she be willing to disregard her own safety and travel to Xinjiang because of an inexplicable dream? Her courage was 100 times greater than that of Yu Miaoqi. Ridiculous, it's just a dream. Shen Yuanqi refused to believe everything his younger sister said. How could anyone foresee the future from a dream? It must be because she missed him so much that she fell ill and became crazy. After being angry for a while, he immediately sent people to chase after her. However, she had already been gone for 5 days. Moreover, she was riding at top speed. It was already too late to chase after her. In Prefecture U, the matriarch had been seriously ill ever since Yuxiang left. Despite her illness, she still insisted on arranging Yuxiu's marriage. Every time Yuxiang came to visit, he was driven away by her and said many heartless words. Mama Ma brewed the medicine and helped her master drink it slowly. Seeing that she was getting older and older, she couldn't help but advise the old lady, just let Master Ho and Miss be together. After all, they aren't biological siblings. They grew up together and have a deep friendship. Shut up. The matriarch smashed the empty bowl. She coughed and spoke with difficulty. It's precisely because they grew up together that they can't be together. So what if they aren't biological siblings? In the eyes of outsiders, they used to be biological siblings. This point can't be erased. There are so many people in the capital, just a mouthful of saliva from each of them would be enough to drown our Yongla Marquis Manor. Others can say whatever they want. Our Marquis Yongla doesn't have much of a reputation to speak of. We don't need that bit of dirty water. Mama Ma was worried and spoke the truth. Seeing her master's fierce glare, she hurriedly covered her mouth and lowered her head. For a while, there was only the sound of Wan Chiu clearing away the broken bowls in the room. Clang, clang. Each sound was more annoying than the last. After Wan Chiu left, Mama Ma thought left and right. She braced herself and said, "The old lady, could it be that you've forgotten? Master Kohai once said that Master Ho has the appearance of dying young, and Miss Xiang is his Tai benefactor. She can help him change his fate. The two of them together are a match made in heaven. Everyone will be happy. Now that you've driven Miss Xiang out, won't you hinder Master Ho's fate? Master Ho is currently fighting for his life on the battlefield in Shijiang." Speaking up to this point, she stopped before going too far. The matriarch didn't think much of it at first, but when she heard the last part, she shuddered. These past few years, the Marquis household had prospered day by day, and her grandson was also safe and sound. She gradually forgot about Kohai's comments. Now that Mama Ma mentioned it, it was as if a bolt of lightning struck her head, splitting her soul into pieces. However, she had experienced many storms and waves, so she was able to stay calm. She clenched her teeth and waved her hand. "No, Yen has been fine for so many years. That calamity must have passed. How can there be a reason for biological siblings to become husband and wife? I will never agree." As soon as she thought about her grandson and granddaughter becoming husband and wife, she felt as if there was a fishbone stuck in her throat. She felt nauseous. In the end, she couldn't pass the barrier of morality and ethics. As for the matter of fate, no one could be sure about that illusory thing. What if Kohai made a mistake? Mama Ma saw her close her eyes and begin to recite scriptures. Knowing that she had made up her mind, she could only withdraw. Yuxiang traveled day and night, and it only took her a month to reach Shijiang. Before she even stepped into Ulan Chabu's territory, she heard that the Han army was defeated and lost 2 cities in a row. The Han army's commander-in-chief, Yu Pinyin, was shot dead by the second prince of Shi, Shiganbala, and his body fell into the Wu River without a trace. Baptized by the sympathetic eyes of a group of monks, Yuxiang's mind went blank for a moment. Her hand loosened and the teacup fell. Tao Hong and Lu Lu quickly leaned over to help her wipe the hot tea. As they wiped, their eyes turned red, and they clenched their teeth to hold back their sobs. "Why are you crying? Brother is not dead, why are you crying? Quickly put away your tears." Yu Xiang slowly clenched her fists and said resolutely. Kohai, aren't you the best at fortune-telling? Help me calculate my brother's fortune. Amitba, benefactor Yu is blessed and will certainly be able to turn misfortune into blessing. Good, well said. You are worthy of being Master Kohai, who can predict things like a god. My brother must be fine. Quickly pack up and set off. Let's go to the Quishui forest. She lifted the package, and the light blue cloth was immediately stained with a few drops of blood. She had scratched her palm. Ku Hui asked puzzledly, what are we going to do in the Quishui forest? The Quishui forest was located in the upper reaches of the Wu River. It was an endless primeval forest. Walking in was like walking into a maze. There were also fierce beasts lurking in the dark, waiting for an opportunity to move. Even the Shi people, who lived on raw meat all year round, did not dare to easily set foot in it. It could be said to be a death zone. To find my brother. Yu Xiang replied without turning her head. There was a voice in her heart guiding her in that direction. Since benefactor Yu fell into the Wu River, you should go downstream to find him. How can you go upstream? Although there are many Shi tribes on the downstream coast, they won't kill the monks of the Zhenghua temple. You only need to shave your hair and wear a kasaya. You should be able to come and go freely. Ku Hui reminded her. Yu Xiang turned to look at him and seriously replied, I'm not reluctant to part with my black hair, nor am I afraid of being hunted down by the Shi people. I just firmly believe that my brother is in the Quishui forest and is still alive. That feeling is like the guidance of Buddha from the underworld. Can you understand? When it came to Buddha, Ku Hui's face became solemn and he sincerely prayed. The rest of the monks also had nothing to say. Wherever Yu Xiang pointed, they would go, very obedient. On this day, they stayed in a border town. Not far away was the dark Quishui forest, like a fierce beast with its mouth wide open to swallow all the people who set foot in it. However, these people did not include the monks of the Zhenghua temple, especially Kohai and Ku Hui. Both of them liked to wander. They had crossed oceans, crossed deserts, climbed mountains, and covered the entire continent. Their ability to survive in the wild was second to none. A place like the Quishui forest was extremely dangerous for others, but for them, it only took them 10 days to half a month to explore it. The two prepared a compass, dry food, medicine, daggers, and other things. They also explained a lot of survival skills to Yu Xiang before returning to their room to rest. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.